Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something a little different. We're not visiting a royal court to sip mead with kings or gallop through sunny fields with knights. No, tonight you're inside a stone fortress, high on a windy hill, somewhere in 14th century Europe. It's early December. The last cart of late harvest vegetables just rolled through the gate, and the first snow has begun to fall. You're wearing 3 layers, but it's already not enough. Congratulations, you probably won't survive this winter. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is. It's always fun knowing where this reaches across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through the great arched doorway of the castle, your boots crunching on a thin crust of frozen mud. The smell hits you first. Not rot exactly, but the rich, damp stink of wool, smoke, and unwashed bodies packed inside for the season. The air is cold enough to sting your teeth, and already your breath hangs in little ghosts around your face. It's only going to get colder from here. That thick stone keep? It may look imposing and safe from the outside, but inside it's a refrigerator made of granite. Your first impression is that the place feels dead, not in a haunted way yet, but like the building itself has slowed down for winter. The corridors echo with every step you take, because the tapestries can only do so much to muffle the sound or trap the heat. There are rushes on the floor, dried plant stalks strewn everywhere to catch spills and smells, but they crunch underfoot like brittle bones. Someone mixed in some herbs, maybe lavender or mint, to try to mask the stench. It doesn't help. You're shown to your quarters, which is generous wording. It's a shared chamber tucked above the buttery, not too far from the kitchens, so on rare occasions, you'll catch a whiff of something warming on the hearth. But right now the room is colder than outside. The stone walls sweat. Your breath fogs the small glass slit that serves as a window, unshuttered and rattling in the wind. You press a hand to the wall out of curiosity, and your fingers come away damp. Let's talk insulation. There isn't any. The best you've got is a wool tunic, a linen underlayer that hasn't been washed in weeks, and maybe a cloak if you're lucky. The higher-ups in the castle, the lord, his family, maybe the steward, have heavier furs, imported ones even, but those are locked away tight. You're given a sheepskin and told to huddle. Evening falls fast in winter, and with it comes a kind of gloom that seeps in through the stones. The candles flicker dimly, and the torches do more to cast ominous shadows than offer any real warmth. You eat a crust of bread by firelight, savouring the heat of your hands more than the food. The silence is broken only by the occasional bark from the yard, the shuffle of a scullery maid, or a cough echoing down the stairs, deep, wet, and a little too familiar. By now, you've realised that the castle is alive in the worst way. Rats skitter in the walls, bats roost in the rafters, everything breathes, groans, settles, and occasionally screams, especially when the wind whips through the murder holes like an old spirit finally let loose. Sleep doesn't come easy here. You wrap yourself tightly in your blanket, press your back to the warmest body in the room, and still your nose is cold. Your dreams are fractured, flickering between memories of sunlit fields and the creeping dread of a winter that lasts too long. You wake often, sometimes because your foot's gone numb, sometimes because someone's gotten up to relieve themselves in the corner bucket. In the moments between waking and sleep, you wonder if anyone actually makes it through an entire medieval winter sane, or clean, or breathing. The next morning is worse. Your blanket is damp from your own breath. Your fingers are stiff, hard to bend. The candle stub is out, and it's still pitch dark outside, even though the rooster's crowing. Time means less now. You operate by firelight, and days are only measured by whether you had hot food or not. Most days you don't. There's this idealised version of castle life people tend to hold. Grandeur, roaring fires, banquets, ladies in velvet sleeves sipping from jewelled goblets. And sure, that might happen for an hour or two during Yule if your lord is generous. But most of the time is trudging through half-frozen corridors, trying not to drop a torch, hoping your boots don't wear through. Castles weren't built for comfort. They were built for defence, and in winter even the wind is an enemy. Historically, most medieval castles had open fireplaces without chimneys, so the smoke simply drifted upward, and out through roof vents. In theory, in reality, most of it drifted back down into your lungs. That's why your eyes are constantly stinging and your throat feels raw. No one escapes the smoke. It clings to your clothes, hair, even your skin, until you're not sure what smells worse, you or the latrine shaft near the kitchen stairs. Here's a weird detail. People didn't necessarily hate the cold. They expected it. What they feared was the damp. Moisture brought sickness, rot, and they believed corrupted humours. Warm and dry was the goal. But in a castle like this, that's fantasy. The air here is thick with chill and mildew. That chill creeps into your marrow and sets up camp. Oh, and remember that fun scholarly debate I promised? Here's one. Historians still bicker over just how cold it actually was in the Middle Ages. Some argue we're in what's called the Little Ice Age, a period of global cooling between the 14th and 19th centuries. Others think that's overhyped or localised. But either way, standing in a stone tower with no insulation and nothing but a wool cloak to your name, cold is cold, theories be damned. By nightfall again, you start counting down the days. Not to anything specific, just away from today. Each sunset is one step closer to spring, maybe. You think about the green fields beyond the hills, about warmth and open doors and days that don't hurt to breathe in. But for now, you tighten your belt another notch, say a little prayer to anyone who'll listen, and try not to listen to the scratching in the walls. Morning again, though you'd hardly know it. The sun doesn't so much rise as it reluctantly stains the horizon, a dull grey. There's no warmth to it, just enough light to remind you how cold everything still is. You sit up slowly, joints creaking, muscles sore from sleeping like a folded napkin on a mattress stuffed with straw and probably mice. You can see your breath again. Always your breath. The stone walls that seem so impressive in summer now feel like a personal attack. They radiate cold like they're powered by some malicious force. Touch one with your bare hand for too long and your skin sticks a little. The walls are 3 or 4 feet thick, meant to withstand battering rams and flaming arrows, but they're excellent at one other thing, holding in cold like a giant meat locker. There's a fireplace, sure, sort of. It's a quatlofueting in the wall, blackened with decades of soot, and it's the room's only official nod toward warmth. The fire in it is mostly symbolic. The logs burn fast and the fuel stores are being rationed. You learn quickly that the phrase, a roaring fire, is reserved for the Great Hall or the Lord's private chamber, not for lowly attendants, guards, or you. You huddle beside it anyway, coaxing it like a wounded animal, feeding it scraps, a broken chair leg, a handful of twigs, anything that burns. The smoke spirals upward and immediately back down again, crawling along the ceiling before sinking into your lungs. Your eyes water, your nose runs. The cold doesn't just exist, it seeps into you, makes a home under your skin. Despite all the stone and supposed grandeur, castles are incredibly drafty. You feel it in the floorboards when there are floorboards. Some rooms are just packed earth. You feel it in your boots. The wind threading up your leggings, searching for skin. There are arrow slits. Narrow vertical windows carved into the walls so archers can shoot from within. And while those are great for battle, they're also wonderful portals for icy air. Even when they're stuffed with rags or wood, the wind finds a way. You walk the halls with your cloak wrapped tightly, hood up, hands tucked into your sleeves. Others pass you doing the same, heads bowed, expressions grim. The joke, if anyone's in a joking mood, is that everyone looks like monks this time of year, wrapped in layers, silent, trudging. Conversation is kept to a minimum, not just because no one has the energy, but because speaking makes your teeth ache from the chill. You pass a maid scrubbing a floor with freezing water from a bucket that's already icing over. She doesn't look up. Her hands are red, raw. You nod, but she says nothing. The work doesn't stop just because it's winter. If anything, it gets worse. Everything slows, sure, but it doesn't stop. Animals still need feeding, floors still need sweeping, and food still needs preparing, if only to keep bellies from forgetting what warm feels like. In the Great Hall, the one place meant to inspire awe, you find only more cold. It's a cavernous space with tall ceilings and stone walls hung with threadbare tapestries. The fire here is larger, yes, but so is the room. The heat it gives off can't compete with the size of the space or the cold pouring in from every direction. You take a seat on a bench near the hearth, stretching your hands toward the flames like a pilgrim worshipping a long-lost god. Historically, these halls were the heart of a castle, where people gathered, ate, and sometimes slept in rows for warmth. But tonight, like every night lately, the hall feels like a museum. People shuffle through it like ghosts, eyes hollow, shoulders hunched. You sit close to a dog for warmth. Not yours, just one that wanders freely and doesn't bite. Here's a bit of a fringe fact. In some castles, the walls were actually filled with materials like horsehair, moss, or clay in an attempt to insulate. The problem? It rarely worked, and sometimes it backfired, trapping moisture and creating perfect little mould ecosystems. Nothing like living inside a fungus sponge. Now let's pause for the scholarly disagreement of the night. Historians can't agree on how frequently fires were maintained in the less important parts of a castle. Some argue fires were constantly kept going, even in servant areas. Others say fires were lit sparingly, only during meals or when a room was in use. Based on how your toes feel right now? You're leaning toward the latter. You leave the hall with your cloak reeking of smoke, and your stomach lightly growling from the single bowl of thin broth and chunk of barley bread you were given. There's no fire waiting back in your chamber. Someone took the last bit of wood, and no one will admit who. You consider accusing the guy 2 pallets down, the one who snores like a dying bear, but you're too tired to start a fight over sticks. Instead, you crawl into your bedding, such as it is, stacking 2 cloaks over yourself, burying your face in the least filthy part of the wool. You find your spot again, knees curled, back turned to the wind coming through the window slit. Sleep doesn't come quickly, but it does come. And in that half-sleep, you start to hear the castle groaning again. Not loudly, not constantly, just groaning. The stones pop and sigh as they contract in the cold. The beams above your head creak like they might shift. You've heard stories of entire rooms collapsing under snow weight, only in the really old parts of the keep, of course, but you're in one of those, so you close your eyes and pretend that creak was nothing. In some strange way, this becomes routine. You wake, freeze, warm yourself by a barely there fire, eat a tasteless lump of food, and go back to your freezing corner to survive another night. You don't think any more about comfort, only about preservation. You start to notice things like which parts of the floor stay warm longest after someone's walked across them, or how if you wrap your leggings a certain way, the wind doesn't sneak in, your standards lower. A lot. By the end of the second week, you forget what real warmth feels like. You dream about summer, but even your dreams feel cold around the edges. It's a strange reality, being surrounded by such strong, thick walls and still feeling completely exposed. The stone may keep enemies out, but it sure doesn't keep the cold from crawling in. You shuffle back into the Great Hall sometime near midday, though time is becoming less and less trustworthy in your brain. The torches are lit already, though their flickering glow just makes everything feel more haunted. A few others mill around, arms crossed tightly, shoulders hunched as if they're trying to keep their souls from escaping their bodies. You sit on a hard bench near the centre and stare up, not at the fire, that's reserved for people with titles, but at the dark rafters, where soot clings like some ancient creeping moss. You think for a moment you see movement, just a bat, or maybe 2. You hope it's just 2. Now here's the thing about the Great Hall in winter. It looks impressive, but functionally, it's just a larger, colder version of the same miserable rooms you sleep in. The ceilings are high, way too high, like someone designed it specifically to make heat run away screaming. There's one massive hearth built into the stone at one end, a blackened iron grate stuffed with logs. That's where the heat comes from, and it doesn't go far. The lord and lady of the castle sit closest to the blaze, of course, up on a slightly raised dais, with their elbows leaning lazily on fur-draped tables. They don't look especially warm either. The lady has her hands tucked deep into a lined muff, and the lord is sipping from a steaming cup like it's the last source of joy on earth. But they do have a few perks you don't. Blankets, furs, servants to rotate heated stones under their feet. One of them even has a spaniel curled under the table, its tail occasionally twitching. You, on the other hand, sit where heat is something you read about in fables. The bench is stone, or maybe wood. Hard to tell, it's too cold to care. Your breath curls visibly with every sigh, and the air smells like a combination of wet wool, grease, and extinguished candles. You shift your legs to avoid the frozen drips leaking from the flagstones overhead. Apparently no one ever solved the issue of melting frost finding its way inside. You try to eat something, a hunk of crusted rye bread dipped into something pretending to be stew. It's lukewarm, thick, mostly root vegetables and maybe a scrap of salted pork if you're lucky. You chew slowly, jaw sore from the cold, wondering how anyone ever had the energy to run a kingdom like this. Maybe that's why people were always at war, at least fighting warmed you up. A historical note you might not have guessed. The tapestries lining the walls aren't just decoration, they're insulation. Well, that's the idea anyway. Thick woven panels of wool or linen hung against the stone to try and trap warmth inside the room. But these ones are faded, tattered at the edges, and so thin they may as well be tissue paper. One even has a visible rat hole gnawed through the bottom corner. Heat doesn't stay here. It just visits briefly and leaves. You lean back slightly and glance around the room. No one is talking, not really. Just murmurs, coughs, the occasional clatter of a dropped spoon. Someone near the hearth is playing a lute, trying to pluck out a tune with frostbitten fingers. It's out of tune, but strangely comforting, proof that someone hasn't given up completely yet. And now, a fringe detail that's honestly kind of wild. Some castle architects tried heating the Great Hall with a system called a hypercaust, a Roman invention involving hot air channeled through floor spaces. Sounds fancy, right? Almost no one pulled it off. Too expensive, too impractical, and way too fragile for medieval engineering. So most halls went with good old-fashioned bonfires and praying for spring. You finish your meal, or what counts as one, and retreat to the side of the hall where the servants occasionally warm pots of cider or thin wine. Not for you, though. That's for the upper crust. You sniff longingly, catching the scent of cloves and something sweet. The rest of you are left to nurse a mug of thin ale or gritty water if you're brave. Warm drinks are a privilege. You're lucky to get your lips around a cup that doesn't crack in your hand from the cold. You think, not for the first time, about how castles were meant to intimidate. All that stone, the high walls, the battlements, the echo of footsteps like a drumbeat of control. And in summer, it probably does feel powerful. But now, in the dead of winter, you feel like you're trapped in the belly of some ancient, freezing beast. Every breath you take fogs in the air like a sigh from its lungs. There's a scholarly debate here that doesn't sound thrilling, but actually matters. Some historians argue that the Great Hall wasn't always used as a communal space during the winter, that during the coldest months, activity shrank into the smaller solar rooms or chambers off the side where fires could be better maintained. Others believe the hall remained central year-round, even if it meant everyone shivered together like noble popsicles. Based on how many people are crammed in here right now, you're inclined to believe the second camp. Night starts creeping in early as always. The daylight lasts for a blink. The servants begin their endless routines again, collecting trenchers, sweeping crumbs into buckets, stoking the dying fire, just enough to keep the illusion alive. You know you'll be herded out soon. The hall gets shut down late at night, after the lord and his inner circle retire. Anyone lingering too long might be tasked with extra chores or, worse, asked to carry out some miserable job in the stables or towers. So you leave before you're told, stepping out into the corridor, which somehow feels even colder than before. The great hall, frigid as it was, still held human heat. Out here, in these echoing stone passages, it's like walking through an abandoned tomb. Your footsteps bounce back at you. You tighten your cloak, fingers stiff, and head toward your sleeping corner, already dreading the frozen mattress waiting for you. You pass a torch on the wall and hold your hands close, not to warm them, but just to remember what warm feels like. The flame dances mockingly, tiny, orange, promising nothing. And you realise then, this castle may have walls 10 feet thick, a moat, towers and guards, but it offers little protection from the enemy you fear most. The cold doesn't attack, it lingers, it waits, it learns your name. By the 4th week of winter you start making peace with drafts. Not in a philosophical way, just practically. The cold has so thoroughly infiltrated your body that noticing a breeze through a cracked window slit becomes more of a curiosity than an emergency. You're already cold. What's a little more? The wind whips down the corridors like it's got somewhere urgent to be. It howls through doorways, sneaks beneath shutters, and tugs us at tapestries like a bored ghost looking for attention. You wake in the middle of the night again. Not because of nightmares, though those are plentiful, but because something scurries across your face. Maybe it's a rat. Maybe a beetle the size of a child's thumb. Either way, it disappears into the straw mattress before you can process the panic. You lie there in the dark, heart pounding, staring into blackness so thick it feels like it's pressing on your eyeballs. The only sound is the soft drip of moisture somewhere behind you, and the dull clatter of shutters banging in the wind. You wonder for the 100th time why castles weren't built with actual windows, like real windows. The answer is simple and stupid. They were designed for war, not weather. The windows are narrow slits, perfect for shooting arrows but utterly useless at keeping out the cold. Shutters help, but most are loose or broken. In the nicer chambers, you might get some linen soaked in wax to hang over the opening. It flaps gently in the breeze. It does nothing. Every day you grow a little more feral. You stop flinching when a rat runs across your path. You develop a sixth sense for which hallway smells the least like spoiled meat. You learn to live in layers, shirt over tunic over cloak, and you never fully undress anymore. Bathing? Laughable. There's a wooden tub stored somewhere, maybe near the kitchen hearth, but heating enough water would take hours and a level of privilege you absolutely do not possess. And your feet. God, your feet. They are never warm, never dry. The boots you were issued in the fall have worn thin at the soles, and the leather has stiffened with moisture and cold. You wrap rags around your ankles before slipping them on each morning. A crude effort to delay frostbite, but it doesn't work. Your toes are always tingling, if not from cold, then from sheer neglect. And when the numbness gives way to stabbing pain, you know it's time to start worrying. Some of the other castle dwellers wear extra cloth wrapped around their legs, tied in spiral fashion from ankle to knee. This technique, called putties in later eras, works surprisingly well, but it's not standard issue. You only get it if you're clever, or if someone dies and you're fast enough to take what they left behind. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. There was, in fact, a belief that sleeping with garlic stuffed in your socks would keep your blood hot through the night. It didn't. It just made the rats more curious. You find yourself drawn, oddly enough, to the lowest parts of the castle. The undercroft, the storage cellars, even the dungeons. These places aren't warm, but they're consistent. The temperature down there rarely changes, and in winter that predictability becomes its own kind of comfort. The air smells of stone and root vegetables and mouldy straw. But it doesn't bite. It doesn't shift. It just is. You pass by a servant girl stacking crates of turnips in the cellar one afternoon. Her hands chapped and bleeding through the cracks. She gives you a tired glance but says nothing. No one really speaks unless it's necessary anymore. Language wastes breath, and breath fogs the air, and fog draws attention. Quiet is easier. Back upstairs you find a temporary haven, a small corridor lined with the old hunting tapestries. It's not warmer exactly, but it's less freezing. You lean against the wall and let your legs rest for a while. Watching a mouse dart out from beneath the edge of the weaving, it pauses, sniffs at your boot and dashes away. You're not even surprised. It's probably trying to survive winter too. And now, an open debate to stir your already frozen brain. Historians can't quite agree on whether castles were originally designed with cold resistance in mind at all. Some claim that medieval architects tried to factor in sun exposure, wind direction, and natural insulation. Others argue that warmth was a complete afterthought, and the people just suffered through it. Judging by your current condition, you're team afterthought. There's a conversation you overhear in passing, two knights grumbling about how the drafts are worse this year. One insists the North Tower was always colder, and the other swears the wind has shifted because of bad omens. You don't know if the wind listens to omens, but you do know the North Tower is practically uninhabitable. The walls sweat like they're alive, and the air smells faintly of old blood and mildew. You'd rather sleep outside. You remember what someone told you weeks ago now in a half-joking tone. Don't die in winter, no one will dig for you. You didn't take it seriously at the time. Now, it's not even a joke. The ground is frozen solid. Graves are difficult, slow, and require labour no one's willing to offer when their own hands are cracking open from frost. Bodies that die inside the castle stay inside, sometimes behind a door, sometimes just there. You haven't seen anyone die yet, but you've seen people stop talking, stop moving as much, grow paler, thinner, quieter. Kind of hibernation, but not the good kind, more like resignation. You feel it too, creeping in like the cold, but not depression exactly, just a dullness. A soft, grinding erosion of self. The nights stretch longer, darker. Sometimes you sleep a little too deeply, and wake wondering if your heart is still beating. It always is, but just barely. You begin to wonder how anyone survives this, not just physically, but mentally. The cold doesn't just take heat. It takes hope. It takes sound, colour, sensation. It scrapes away everything that isn't essential, and leaves you with raw survival. One night you press your hand to the stone wall as you lie in bed, just to see if it still feels like anything. It doesn't. The cold has seeped into you so deeply that you and the castle are starting to feel like the same thing. Damp, worn down, and completely hollow inside. And yet you get up again the next morning, because what else is there? You wake up to the sound of scratching. Not frantic, not loud, just persistent. Little claws on wood. You open your eyes and see nothing at first. Just grey shapes in a grey room. Your breath curls like smoke above your chest, and your blanket is damp again. You hear it again. Scratch, scratch. Then a tiny squeal. It's coming from the corner where you shoved that old sack of barley husks last week. Probably rats, or something worse. You throw the blanket off and sit up slowly. Everything in your body creaks like old timber. Your knees are stiff, your back feels like it was beaten with a frozen stick. When your bare fingers touch the floor to steady yourself, they go instantly numb. You fumble for your boots, still wet from yesterday, and wince as you slide your feet into them. They've frozen in the night, and the leather bites at your skin. You glance across the room at the others. No one moves. They're all swaddled in whatever fabric they could scavenge. Most are still breathing. A few haven't stirred in a while. You'll check later. You always do. Out in the corridor, the air is sharper. It slices at your face like thin blades. The torch you pass is nothing more than a smouldering stub now, and the hall is dim, shadows stretching in every direction like black vines. You follow the stone steps downward toward the kitchen, drawn by the promise of heat or at least company. You hear voices, low, murmuring, and then a wet cough that echoes down the stairwell like a warning. You make it to the lower kitchens and step inside. It's warmer, slightly. The hearths are lit and steam rises from a massive cauldron hanging over the flame. A stew maybe, or just boiling roots. Either way it smells better than your own clothes. The cook, an old woman with the arms like hams and a nose that could slice bread, sees you and barks something unintelligible. Probably an insult, you're used to it. She lets you hover by the fire as long as you don't get in her way. A rare privilege. You stretch your fingers toward the flames, watching the frost melt off your knuckles. The pain of returning circulation is worse than the numbness. You bite your lip and don't cry out. Crying wastes salt. Here's a fun fact. Fleas love warmth. So the second you get near the fire, you feel them wake up in your clothes. You scratch absently at your neck, your waist, behind your knees, anywhere they've made themselves at home. Fleas are part of castle life, as guaranteed as cold or hunger. No one talks about them because there's no escaping them. There's a saying you've heard among the servants. Where there's warmth, there's life. And where there's life, there's things that bite. Truer words have never been mumbled while picking lice out of a hairbrush. You sit on a low stool near the wall, close enough to the fire to not freeze but far enough not to be noticed. The cook's assistant, a boy who looks about 10 but might be 15, drops a bucket of offal near your feet and groans. He sits down beside you, panting. "They keep sending scraps from the upper table," he says, not even looking at you. "Always bones, barely anything left on them." He rubs his hands together and sniffs. "I tried gnawing on one. My tooth cracked." You nod. Not because you agree, but because talking feels like effort. He's shivering beside you, his cloak soaked from some errand in the courtyard. His hair is clumped with ice. You offer him the edge of your blanket without thinking. He doesn't take it. "Too many fleas," he mutters. You both sit there in silence. Historically speaking, bedding in medieval castles was a matter of who you know. The rich had feather mattresses, velvet blankets, furs from exotic animals. The rest, straw sacks, maybe layered with old cloth or flattened sheepskins. That's your reality. And while you do technically have a bed, it's not so much a mattress as it is a slow compost pile that you sleep on. And furs? Don't romanticize them. They help, yes, but they also carry fleas like royal messengers. When you huddle under a pelt, you have to shake it out first, and even then, you're still taking home a small army of parasites. You think fondly of the one time you saw a cat curled on a fur blanket in the Lord's Solar. That cat, you're convinced, lives better than you. You return to your sleeping quarters before nightfall, hoping to beat the worst of the chill. The room is even colder than before, if that's possible. Someone's left the shutter open, probably to let out the stink, which is both appreciated and regrettable. You shut it and stuff a rag in the frame, hoping to block the draft. As you lay out your bedding, you hear someone scratching at their scalp. Not lightly, desperately. You glance over and see the steward's assistant, a wiry young man with wild hair and bleeding fingertips. He's got lice, badly. He catches you looking and shrugs. They say vinegar helps him, he says, but where the hell am I supposed to get vinegar? You nod again. Everyone's itchy, some just hide it better. Your fringe fact of the night. Medieval folks often wore linen undergarments, not just for modesty, but as a sort of flea and lice barrier. The idea was that the bugs would prefer the linen to the skin. They'd strip the linen off at night and hope the vermin came off with it. It's wishful thinking, but when you're desperate, you believe anything. There's one last small mercy before bed. A warming stone. Someone's heated it by Empathy's kitchen fire and passed it around. It's not much, just a flat rock, hot enough to burn if you're not excelbeful. But you clutch it to your chest like a holy relic as you crawl into bed. You press it to your stomach, curl tight around it, and close your eyes. For just a few minutes there's real warmth in your core. Your fingers tingle, your feet stop aching. You imagine briefly what it would be like to sleep this way every night. Warm, dry, safe. The stone cools quickly. Sleep follows it. The castle toilet situation is something you don't think about until you're desperate. And then, oh, do you think about it? Winter has a way of turning every normal function of life into a calculated risk, and relieving yourself is no exception. You wake in the early hours with your bladder screaming, your body frozen in a fetal knot beneath your damp, scratchy blanket. You try to ignore it. You do the math, stand up, walk to the guardrobe, expose skin to freezing air, possibly fall into the shaft, or wet yourself in the straw and smell like ammonia until spring. It's not a great set of options. You eventually peel yourself out of bed, teeth chattering, your boots crunching on the frost-crusted floor. The corridor is pitch black. You fumble for a torch, but someone's taken it, of course. So you grope along the walls like a blind rat, one hand dragging along the cold stone, the other clutching your cloak closed. The guardrobe is built into the outer wall of the castle, a little room suspended above a vertical shaft that leads to either a pit or a running stream below, if you're lucky enough to be in a castle that bothered with proper drainage. You're not. You open the creaky wooden door and are instantly greeted by a smell that could strip paint, if paint existed. It's a hot punch to the throat, thick and sour and ancient. You gag. You always gag. The cold has made everything in the shaft slow down, so the usual rot just sits there, stewing, condensing, becoming. You step inside, squatting over the wooden hole, bracing your feet against the icy sides and doing your best not to let anything valuable, like your dignity, slip down with what you're offering to the depths. The wind blows straight up the shaft and kisses places that were never meant to be kissed by wind. Your legs shake, your nose runs. You think about your life choices. To make it worse, there's no toilet paper, obviously. What you have is straw or maybe a stiff piece of cloth someone's passed around a few too many times. If you're lucky, there are scraps of moss hanging by the wall. No one wants to use the moss. You finish as quickly as humanly possible, red-faced and rattled. Outside the little chamber, you breathe deep the marginally better air and wonder what on earth people did in castles before plumbing. Then you remember, this is what they did. A historical note for you, since we're knee-deep in it already. Castles didn't just have one garderobe. Most had several, usually built along the outer walls so gravity could do its job. Some of the fancier ones even had chutes lined with stone. Fancy. But unless you were nobility with your own private toilet chamber and someone to empty your waste for you, your experience was closer to what you just survived. There's also a niche debate, less scholarly and more practical, about how often these garderobes were cleaned. Some say they were flushed with buckets of water on a semi-regular basis. Others believe that was rare, if ever. Judging by the crusty frost around the chute and the horror show smell, you're starting to lean toward the never camp. You return to your chamber in a state of near trauma, half frozen and fully humbled. Your breath is ragged. You think, not for the first time, about how some people lived entire lives in castles like this. Generations, born and frozen and buried without ever seeing a modern toilet. But here's the kicker. If you're not brave or desperate enough to make the trip to the garderobe in the dead of night, your only other option is the chamber pot. Which is as glamorous as it sounds, a metal or clay pot often shared, kept under your bed. You relieve yourself in it and hope no one knocks it over. Come morning someone, usually the youngest or least lucky, has to carry it out and dump it. You've had the misfortune of carrying the pot once. The smell was nuclear, and you slipped. You didn't fall all the way, but it was close. Since then, you've been team take your chances in the wind tunnel. There's a superstition among the older women in the castle. If you relieve yourself without warming your body first, you let in death. The logic is unclear, but after one particularly brutal night you get it. You feel colder afterward, like you've opened something you can't quite close. By midday, the memory has faded, dulled by hunger and work. You help carry logs to the kitchen, trudge across the icy courtyard with buckets of water, and try not to slip on the treacherous patches of black ice that form near the livestock pens. The pigs are huddled together like survivors of a shipwreck, steaming in their filth. You're briefly jealous of them. At least they have body heat. Your boots squelch with each step, soaked through again. You can't feel your toes, you don't remember the last time you could, and then, miracle of miracles, you're called to help clean the Lord's solar. You dread it, but when you arrive, something unexpected happens. It's warm, not fire warm, but noticeably less miserable. There are thick furs on the chairs. The tapestries on the walls are newer, heavier, with fewer holes. There's a small fire crackling in a brazier near the window. It's like stepping into another world. The chamber pot here is made of glazed ceramic. It has painted flowers. You stare at it stunned. Someone's assigned to empty it twice a day. The air in the room smells like beeswax and dried rosemary. You want to cry. And the real fringe detail? Some medieval castles had guardrobes that emptied directly into the moat. That same moat the guards drink from during desperate sieges. Yeah, so if you're ever time travelling, don't sip from the moat. As you scrub a table leg and listen to a noblewoman hum to herself in the next room, you imagine what it would be like to live in this chamber full time. No chamber pots under the bed, no climbing ladders to freeze your behind in a stone closet, just warmth, luxury, privacy, even a cushion to sit on. But then you glance at the servant beside you who is quietly crying as she scrapes dried wax off the floor. You remember her name is Anis. Last week her brother died. They couldn't bury him. His body is wrapped in a tarp and stored in the root cellar. You saw it, so you stand, back aching, and keep working, because what else is there? The kitchen is the heart of the castle. At least it's supposed to be. You'd think a place built around fire and food would be a natural haven in winter, right? But when you step into the smoky chaos of the lower kitchen just after dawn, you realise it's more battlefield than sanctuary. There's heat, yes, but it's violent heat, the kind that blasts your face near the hearth and leaves the rest of the room bitterly cold. A space of extremes. You dodge a scullery boy dragging a bucket of blood from a recently slaughtered goose, and immediately sidestep a swinging ladle hurled across the room by an enraged cook. The ladle smacks the wall with a clang, slides down and lands at your feet. The cook, covered in flour and rage, doesn't even look up. "If it's not your job, don't touch it," she barks. You don't. You back away quickly and try not to get set on fire. The hearth dominates the far wall, a yawning black maw with iron pots suspended over licking flames. Wood pops loudly, and grease sizzles from an iron griddle, where something, meat, you hope, is being seared. The air is thick, humid with steam and smoke, laced with the scent of onions, ash, and overworked bodies. Someone is crying in a corner, maybe from emotion, but probably just from chopping too many leeks. There are baskets of shriveled root vegetables and sacks of grain barely hanging on to their last breath. The luxury of fresh ingredients died sometime around the first frost. A curious historical detail for you, castle kitchens were often separate from the main keep to reduce fire risk. That means food had to be carried across open courtyards, through sleet and snow to reach the Great Hall. By the time the plates arrive, most are lukewarm at best. Cold meat is the least of your problems. Today you've been assigned to peel turnips, shrinking, soft ones, their outer skins brown and slimy. You settle near the fire for light, but not too close. The last boy who got greedy came away with blisters. Your knife is dull, your fingers numb, and after the first 10 your palms ache. But you work silently, like everyone else. There's an unspoken understanding in the winter kitchen. Talk too much, and you get noticed. Get noticed and you get yelled at. Or worse, reassigned to latrine duty. The cook's shouting again. She's discovered a barrel of pickled cabbage has gone bad. Mould creeping in from the sides. She slaps it with a wooden spoon and curses so creatively you actually learn 3 new words. 2 of them might not even be real. She waves a finger in the air and demands to know who let the barrel spoil. No one answers. You don't breathe. She glares at everyone, then storms off toward the larder. Once she's gone, the room exhales. Someone laughs nervously. A girl across from you leans in and mutters, "She threw a rabbit at me once." A rabbit. Still alive. You raise your eyebrows. She nods solemnly, then returns to dicing onions. You glance around at the rest of the food, what little of it there is. Dried beans, turnips, onions, barley, and a few stringy chickens waiting to be plucked. No fruit, no dairy, no fresh herbs. You can't remember the last time you saw an egg. And meat? Reserved for the Lord's table. The rest of the castle eats what's left behind, if anything's left at all. You'll be lucky if you get to taste the broth from those chickens. A fringe fact you won't be able to stop thinking about now. In lean winters, cooks sometimes added crushed animal bones to soup to thicken it. Not bone broth in the modern wellness sense. No, this was more like gritty dust scraped from marrow and boiled to stretch the meal. You've definitely had some recently. Then there's the bread. Always the bread. Thick, coarse, and baked with whatever flour's available. Rye. Barley. Sometimes just oat husks and sawdust if things get bad. It arrives hard and dry, sliced with a chisel more than a knife, and chewed until your jaw gives out. No one wastes bread, even if it tastes like dirt. You dip it in broth, you soak it in wine, you hide it in your pocket, and gnaw on it like a medieval squirrel. The only truly warm place is near the bread ovens. Great clay beasts built into the wall, their bellies fed with logs and dried dung. Yes, dung. When the firewood runs low, and it always does, you burn what you've got. It smells like burning hell, but the heat is real. You see one of the pot boys slumped nearby, his hands wrapped around a baking tile, eyes closed like he's dreaming of summer. You sneak closer when no one's looking, just a few minutes. Your cheeks thaw, your ears tingle back to life. You imagine crawling inside the oven, like some medieval pastry, baking your way to comfort. You understand now why animals sleep in piles. There's a scholarly dispute you once overheard, back when the steward was still friendly enough to talk near you. He claimed that winter kitchens were efficient, that with the right system, food production barely faltered. A passing friar scoffed and said he had never seen a kitchen that didn't fall apart in cold weather. Fires burn hotter, yes, he said, but nothing cooks evenly, and half your staff is coughing into the stew. Honestly, after spending 3 weeks down here, you side with the friar. As dusk settles, though the sky's been grey all day, you help carry the meal trays across the courtyard. The plates are steaming when you leave. By the time you reach the great hall, they're tepid at best. The nobles barely notice. One licks his fingers and spits a piece of gristle onto the rushes. A hound snaps it up. You retreat, hands empty, back to the warmth of the ovens. The cook tosses you a crust of something. You catch it without thinking, bite in. It's dry, crumbly. Parsnip and onion maybe. You chew slowly. It tastes like survival. Later that night, you lie in bed and smell the food still clinging to your clothes. You close your eyes and imagine a real meal. A fresh apple, a roast chicken, soft bread with melted butter. You almost forget your stomach aches. But just before sleep claims you, your body twitches. A flea bites your ankle, then another behind your knee. You scratch at your arm and feel a cluster. Warmth, it turns out, comes at a cost. You learn quickly that hunger in winter isn't a single feeling, it's a chorus. Your stomach might growl first, sure, but then the rest of your body joins in. Your knees ache from lack of fat, your hands tremble as your blood slows, and your thoughts get muddy, like trying to think through a wool sock. And worst of all, you never really feel full. Even on the days when food is decent, the satisfaction never lasts. The cold eats your calories faster than the fire burns wood. You've settled into a routine now, and with routine comes clarity, especially about the pecking order. The food hierarchy in the castle is as rigid as the stone walls, and unless you were born under a crest with a bird or lion on it, you eat what trickles down the chain of command, which is to say, not much. You see the contrast most sharply during mealtimes in the Great Hall. The Lord's table gleams with silver platters, steaming in trenchers of meat, and pitchers of mulled wine. There's roasted game, venison, goose, even a wild boar if the huntsmen have been lucky. You can smell the fat dripping off the bones from across the hall, your mouth watering like a broken dam. But you sit near the wall, hunched with the others, staring at a bowl of what they call pottage. Pottage is a kind word for what is essentially a hot swamp of barley, onions, and anything else they had lying around. Sometimes it's too thick, sometimes too watery, and once it tasted suspiciously like hay. You eat it anyway, because even bad food is better than no food. Here's a painful historical truth. Meat was expensive and heavily rationed. The upper class ate it regularly, twice a day in some cases. The lower class, not unless someone up top had leftovers or the pig shed got struck by lightning. You once saw a kitchen boy sneak a roasted duck leg meant for a noble and lose 2 fingers for it. You haven't craved duck since. Your only consistent protein source comes from salted fish or dried peas. The fish smells like it died twice, and the peas cook down into a grey mush with the consistency of glue. Still, you scrape your bowl clean every time and then sit quietly, willing yourself not to dream about sausages. You hear a lot of stories about feasting in castles, banquets with acrobats and jellied swans and pies that chirp. But those are special occasions. What no one talks about is what everyone eats most of the time. Bread that could double as masonry, stew made from yesterday's stew, cheese so hard it could shatter teeth, and water? That's a luxury, weirdly enough. It's often contaminated, so most people drink weak ale or watered wine, even kids. You once asked for a cup of water and the servant looks at you like you just requested poison. Maybe you had. And then there are the fast days, holy days, which feel like they outnumber the regular ones, where meat is forbidden. You'd think this would make things simpler, but it actually makes the cooks more frantic. Now everything must be fish-based, and good luck finding fresh fish in a snow-locked landscape. On those days, your bowl might contain a paste made of ground almonds and fish oil, moulded into a shape vaguely resembling a bird. It's every bit as confusing as it sounds. A fringe fact for your sleepless brain tonight: during lean winters, people sometimes boiled leather. Belts, shoes, even gloves, anything not nailed down, soaked in broth, softened by hours of simmering, and eaten like desperate jerky. It's not a common practice, but it's not myth either. In the right conditions, or the wrong ones, you'd be surprised what starts to look edible. You haven't reached that point. Not yet. But there was a moment last week when you caught yourself eyeing the wax on a candle stub, wondering if chewing it would help the hollow feeling in your belly. You didn't do it. Someone else did. The look on his face said it didn't help. And the lords, they don't just eat better, they eat differently. While you crouch over a wooden bowl using a crust of bread as a spoon, they dine from pewter dishes. They use spices, real ones, saffron, cinnamon, pepper, the kind that cost more than your entire family's belongings. You caught a whiff of nutmeg once and nearly wept. There's also a curious scholarly debate you overheard once in the steward's office. Two scribes were arguing over whether medieval nobles actually appreciated rich food or just wanted to show off. One said the flavours were too strong, too jumbled, more about wealth than taste. The other insisted the elite developed more refined palates. You don't care either way. You'd drink hot lard if it meant warming up and going to bed full. Tonight, after the evening meal, you linger in the hall as long as you can. You press yourself near the kitchen entrance, hoping to catch something, anything that gets dropped. You manage to snag half a heel of bread someone discarded. It's rock hard, but it still has flavour. You chew slowly in the corner, savouring each bite like it's a banquet. That's when a kitchen girl shuffles past, carrying a platter of bones and rinds. She glances at you, then glances away. But a second later she drops something near your foot, a chunk of cold goose fat hardly touched. She doesn't say anything, just keeps walking. You pick it up and shove it into your mouth before you can think. It's oily, salty, and indescribably delicious. You lick your fingers, then wrap your cloak tighter around yourself and return to your chamber with the taste still lingering. For a moment you feel like royalty. You crawl into bed with a belly that, if not full, is at least not howling. That's what passes for a win these days. Your hands still smell faintly of smoke and fat. You don't even mind, and as you close your eyes, you find yourself dreaming, not of feasts or fire, but of having just enough. Somewhere in the middle of another endless grey morning, you realise you've been drinking more ale than water, and no one around you seems to find this strange. In fact, it's encouraged. The casks are lined up in the kitchen like squat sentries, tapped and refilled, day after day, their contents passed out in wooden cups and hollowed horns like some sacred elixir. You'd think it would be a cause for celebration, drinking every day, but there's nothing cheerful about it. This isn't drinking for fun, it's survival, and it's starting to show. The ale isn't strong, it's what they call small beer, brewed weak so it won't knock you off your feet after 2 sips. But it's still fermented, still slightly bitter, and after 3 or 4 cups, your tongue starts to feel fuzzy and your mind just a little slower than usual. Not drunk exactly, just dulled. Everyone's a little dulled in winter. It's a mood, a haze, a way of smoothing over the sharp edges of hunger, cold and exhaustion. Water, of course, is the real problem. There's a well, yes, but it freezes, and when it's not frozen, it's suspect. The last person who drank from it raw came down with a fever so fast he was coughing blood before nightfall. So the cook won't even wash badami vegetables in it unless it's been boiled. You once heard her mutter, "Cold water's just the devil with good manners." So you drink the ale, or you drink the thin wine, the kind that tastes like vinegar and feet. Even the children do. You watch a 6-year-old sip from a mug and belch loudly, then wander off to chase a chicken with the wobbly gait of someone twice his age. You say nothing. What would you even say? Here's the strange bit. People in the castle don't get drunk all the time, not like you'd expect. There's a kind of measured self-control about it, because even if your wine is sour and your ale is weak, it's one of the only things you have to keep warm, to keep clean, and to feel something. Drunkenness is a waste. No one wants to stumble through a snow-covered bailey in the dark and fall into a frozen moat. Again, there's a practical reason behind it all. Alcohol, especially in low concentrations, kills off bacteria. In a world where sanitation is more rumour than reality, that cup of beer might actually be safer than a bucket of well water. That's not just a medieval hunch either. Even modern scholars agree that brewing helped limit some disease spread. Not much, but enough to make a difference. Enough to make beer a form of medicine with the bonus side effect of a buzz. But that little buzz, that's where things get slippery. It's easy to let it creep in when you're shivering and hungry and bone-deep tired. You've seen people drift too far into it. A stable boy who was clever and quick in the autumn now mutters to himself and can't quite walk straight. A washerwoman fell asleep near the fire after 3 cups of mulled wine. She never woke up. They said it was the smoke. You think it was the cold, or maybe she just gave up? There's a fringe belief you hear whispered among the older servants, the ones with teeth missing and eyes like empty wells. They say drink keeps the spirits away, the kind that don't care if you're praying or fasting, the kind that slip into your dreams and whisper cold things in your ears. You're not sure if it's superstition or just an excuse to keep sipping, but on especially long nights, you find yourself clinging to your mug like it's more than just a cup. Not that you can always afford to be choosy. When ale runs low, the cooks make a substitute, a warm tea of sorts, brewed from fermented bread crusts and herbs. It tastes like wet socks, but it gives you a little kick and doesn't poison your guts. Sometimes they spice it with cloves or sage if someone's gotten their hands on a merchant's leftovers. Those are good days. You do wonder, though, what it must be like for the lords. Do they drink the same small beer, or is theirs thicker, richer, full of honey and imported spices? You imagine their cups, goblets probably, stained with red wine from sunny places you've only heard of in stories. Spain, Italy, the Holy Land. Places that probably don't even have snow, or if they do, it's polite about it. There's a historical debate you remember overhearing once between the steward and a visiting friar. The friar claimed that overindulgence in wine was the sign of a decaying soul. The steward laughed and said, "That's funny, coming from someone with wine stains on their sleeves." You liked the steward a little more after that. But the truth is, even the nobility aren't immune to winter's bite. You've heard them coughing behind their thick tapestries, seen the colour drain from their faces when they step into the drafty corridors. Alcohol may dull the cold for a moment, but it doesn't care about your bloodline. Everyone gets cold, everyone gets thirsty, everyone's breath fogs in the dark. One night you're sent to the kitchen to fetch more wine for the solar. You carry the pitcher carefully, terrified you'll spill a drop. The hallway is dim, and your boots slide on frost. You steady yourself against the wall, heart racing. The pitcher is ceramic, expensive. If you break it, it might be your fingers next. You reach the solar without incident, but the room is quiet. Too quiet. Inside, the fire has burned low. One of the noble women is asleep, her hand still wrapped around a goblet. Another lies curled under a fur, lips pale, snoring softly. The man you're supposed to serve, Sir Alderic, aging and fox-eyed, is staring into the fire, cup empty. You refill it to us wordlessly. He doesn't acknowledge you until the last drop. Then, almost without looking, he mutters, "Better drunk than dead in your sleep." You leave without answering. What could you say? He's not wrong. That night you take your own cup, half full of the bread tea, and sip it slowly. It's bitter, warm, and just enough to soften the cold in your bones. For a few minutes the ache in your chest eases. You stare into the dying fire and think maybe just this once you'll sleep all the way through. It starts with a cough. Just one, dry, sharp and distant, somewhere down the corridor in the servants' quarters. You barely notice it at first. There's always coughing in winter. The cold squeezes the lungs like a wet rag, and between the smoke, mould and tightly packed bodies, it's a miracle anyone breathes at all, but the cough doesn't go away. By the end of the day, it's 2 coughs, then 3, then someone vomiting behind the bakehouse. The castle has no official doctor, unless you count the old woman with a box of herbs and a general air of exhausted pessimism. She lives in a tiny cell near the stables and gets summoned only when someone's bleeding too much or already half dead. But after 3 more servants are caught sneezing into their sleeves and one collapses carrying firewood, she's called up to the keep. No one makes eye contact with her as she shuffles past, wrapped in layers and smelling faintly of sage, vinegar and burned feathers. Sickness in winter is no surprise. It's like an extra roommate, rude, uninvited and hard to evict. But this particular bout feels heavier. The cough is wet now, and the sneezes turn to fevers. Someone says it's the chill plague. Someone else insists it's demons. The castle priest claims it's God punishing you all for pride or gluttony or allowing cats inside. You think the priest might just be trying to stay relevant. You keep your head down, move quickly and stop sharing your cup with anyone. Not that it helps. Germs don't care about manners by the 3rd day. The fever has reached the guards. 2 of them abandon their post on the wall to curl up in the chapel and moan for hours until someone drags them away. The Lord orders the chapel cleansed with smoke. The smoke just makes everyone cough more. Here's a historical truth to wrap your head around. People in the Middle Ages didn't understand contagion like we do now. Germ theory was centuries away. Illness was blamed on bad air, imbalanced humours, sin, and the alignment of the stars. Treatment involved prayers, bloodletting, vomiting, and the liberal application of leeches, which for the record doesn't help, but you'll get to the leeches soon enough. In the meantime, you're just trying not to get sick. You sleep farther from the others, even though it means more drafts. You tie a scarf over your mouth, though it is damp within hours. You wash your hands with cold water that feels like punishment. The fear spreads faster than the illness. Every cough makes heads turn. Every sneeze gets side eyes. One poor kitchen girl sneezes twice at dinner and is promptly told to sleep in the hayloft. She doesn't argue. Here's a disturbing little fringe fact. During winter outbreaks, some castles simply locked the sick in storage rooms and left them there. Not to be cruel, just to prevent more death. You've heard whispers that this might happen here. You've also heard that the stewards already cleared out a storeroom near the South Tower, just in case. You stop walking that direction. The sick aren't just cold and miserable. They're hallucinating now. You pass one man, normally cheerful, a strong farmhand, who's curled in a corner weeping and muttering about beetles under his skin. You see a noblewoman shivering on a stool with her hair soaked in vinegar, her maid desperately fanning her with a piece of parchment. Someone's got a wax tablet of saintly prayers pressed to their forehead, like it might draw out the heat. Spoiler, it doesn't. The castle smells different. You'd gotten used to the mix of smoke, grease, unwashed bodies and damp wool. Now there's something new, something metallic and sweet. The smell of illness. It clings to door frames and blankets, rising up from pallets where people cough themselves into silence. You breathe through your sleeve when you pass through the servant wing. Here's the scholarly debate of the day. Some historians argue that illness in castles was worse than in the villages, simply because of population density and poor airflow. Others say castles fared better. Thanks to their resources, access to food and slightly better sanitation. But from where you're sitting, on a bench near a hearth full of sick people sweating through their clothes, you'd say it's all equally terrible. Just different flavours of misery. By the end of the week, the castle physician finally shows up. He's not from here. He's been summoned from a nearby town. He arrives on a thin horse wearing a robe that's 2 parts mystery and 1 part mildew. He carries a wooden case full of clinking tools and dried herbs, and he smells like rosemary, smoke, and something that might be fermented honey. He barely says a word, just nods, listens to lungs, lifts eyelids, and frowns a lot. His treatments include bloodletting, obviously, applying heated iron to the soles of the feet, less obvious, and forcing people to drink something he calls dragon's brew, which tastes like peppery mud. A few people claim they feel better after taking it. One man vomits and then sleeps for 14 hours. Another has a nosebleed so dramatic it stains the rushes for days. You manage to stay healthy, or at least not visibly ill. Your throat itches, your joints ache, but you keep moving, keep working, keep eating, even when your stomach churns. You've convinced yourself that staying active is the cure. Don't stud, don't sit, don't sleep too much. Keep moving until the illness decides to skip you. Then one night your bunkmate doesn't get up. You shake his shoulder. No response. He's still warm, but he's sweating through the furs and murmuring nonsense. Something about fish on the ceiling. You go to find help, but by the time you return, He's curled into a stiff, unnatural shape and his eyes open but unseeing. The body is taken quietly, no ceremony, no bells. The cold ground is still too hard for burial. They wrap him in a sheet, say a few words in Latin, and store him in a root cellar with 2 others. Someone promises he'll get a proper grave in spring. You're not so sure. That night the coughing seems louder than ever. You press your face into your blanket and try to breathe slowly. You picture a meadow, a warm sun, a breeze without chill, and no one coughing, just bird song, just the sound of your own quiet breath. You know it's a dream, but it's the only one you can hold on to. You know it's bad when the leeches come out. There's something deeply unsettling about watching a man pull a cloth pouch from his coat and casually open it to reveal a squirming, shiny pile of medical nightmares. The castle physician doesn't even flinch. He selects them like someone choosing apples from a market stall, holding one up to the firelight before nodding to himself and pressing it gently to a man's neck. The leech wiggles for a moment, unsure, then latches on with a subtle pop you hear more in your imagination than in your ears. You back away. You've seen a lot in this place. Rats, starvation, dead men left unburied. But there's something about leeches that crosses a line. Maybe it's the slow way they swell with blood. Or the fact that people thank the doctor afterward. Like having your blood drained by a slippery parasite is somehow better than being ick. It's not entirely superstition either. In medieval medical theory, most illnesses were blamed on imbalances in the 4 humours: blood, phlegm, black bile and yellow bile. Too much of anyone, and your body would turn against you. Blood in particular was the usual suspect. The logic? If you're feverish or inflamed, clearly you've got too much blood. The solution? Remove some, hence the leeches. Or, if you're feeling fancy, a quick slice with a knife. You see it happen often now. The sick are lined up along the wall of the chapel, because of course, the chapel becomes the infirmary. They're bundled in cloaks and rags, wheezing softly as the physician moves from one to the next, applying leeches, administering broths, and occasionally scrawling something in a stained ledger that probably hasn't seen the light of day since midsummer. You're still not sick, though your throat is raw and your legs feel heavy. You keep telling yourself it's just the cold, just fatigue. You've been tired since October, what's new? But watching someone get bled is enough to keep you alert. A guard, barely old enough to grow a beard, sits with his tunic pulled down over his shoulder, eyes glassy as a line of crimson trickles down his chest. The leech dangles lazily before the doctor peels it off and drops it back into its pouch. The doctor hums, the boy vomits. Someone hands him a cloth. You duck out of the room before they look in your direction. You wonder what's worse, being sick enough to need treatment, or being well enough to watch everyone around you slowly disappear into blankets and silence. Here's your fringe fact of the day. Leeches weren't just for bloodletting. Some healers believed they could draw out bad vapours through the skin, particularly when placed near the temples. One noblewoman once requested them applied directly behind her ears to improve her melancholy. The result? Fewer complaints about sadness. Also a nasty infection. Win some, lose some. Outside the chapel, the castle feels quieter. Not peaceful, just hollow. The usual chorus of clattering boots, shouted orders, and slamming doors is muted now. Fewer people are moving about. Servants are disappearing into corners. Meals are late. Chores are skipped. There's a general sense of everyone pretending not to notice how much emptier everything is. A scholarly debate flickers through your mind, something the steward once muttered over mulled wine. He claimed that during hard winters, mortality wasn't just from the cold or disease, but from neglect. That people stopped caring for one another, stopped watching, stopped helping. You thought he was being dramatic. Now you're not so sure. Back in your shared chamber, the beds are thinning out. The snoring has quieted. One bunk's been empty for 2 nights. No one says where the occupant went. No one wants to know. You sleep curled up like a dog, wrapped in your cloak, hands tucked under your arms to keep the warmth from leaking out. You dream of leeches with human faces. You wake with your heart racing. The next day you're assigned to carry water for the physician. Buckets of melted snow boiled until the scum floats and then cooled again. He doesn't thank you, but you see the way his hands tremble when he dips cloth into it. He's tired, deeply tired, and under that layered coat and proud posture, he looks about ready to collapse. He asks you to help restrain a patient, one of the stable lads who's fevered and thrashing. You hesitate, then nod. It's hard to say no when someone's looking at you like you're their last resort. The boy screams when the leeches touch his skin. He yells for his mother, begs for water, kicks hard enough to bruise your shin. When it's over, he sobs into the pillow and passes out. The physician nods, wipes his hands on a cloth and walks away. You stand there for a long moment, breath steaming in the cold room, wondering how long the boy will last. The worst part? It's starting to feel normal. You don't even flinch now when you see someone coughing up red. You don't pause when someone is carried past you, stiff and bundled like firewood. The guards at the gate don't ask questions when a cart rolls out toward the nearby abbey, carrying 3 bodies wrapped in canvas. One of them might be that kitchen girl who snuck you a scrap of goose fat a few weeks back. You don't ask. There's no bell for the dead, no procession, no mourning clothes, just a quiet nod, a slightly heavier silence, and another task to complete. Life, after all, doesn't stop. Not here, not now. At the end of the day, you sit near the hearth and stare into the flames. Your boots are damp, your fingers ache. Your lungs wheeze when you laugh, so you don't. You just breathe slowly, one shallow breath at a time. Someone nearby mutters a prayer. You catch the name of a saint you've never heard of. You repeat it in your head, just in case. You fall asleep sitting up, wrapped in your cloak, hoping the leeches won't come for you next. The nights are longer now. You don't know exactly how long. Time in the castle has become more of a vague idea than a system, but it feels like the sun only visits for an hour or two before vanishing again, leaving the world in a kind of bluish twilight that never quite becomes day. The candles and torches have been burning more than usual, but no one complains. Darkness brings other things, cold, illness, and the uncomfortable feeling that something unseen is watching from just beyond the reach of the firelight. Which is probably why the chapel is always full now, not in the joyful, celebratory way you'd hope. No, this is pure desperation. The same noblemen who once strolled past the altar without a second glance are now kneeling for hours, muttering under their breath, pressing frozen fingers to iron crosses and whispering confessions no one wants to hear. Even the cook came in yesterday, a rag tied over her thinning hair, eyes red and swollen. You passed her lighting a candle with trembling hands and didn't say a word. Religion in a medieval castle is everywhere, especially in winter. It hangs in the air like smoke. You feel it in the freezing chapel floor as you kneel. Always damp, always cold. You hear it in the droning Latin chants echoing through the corridors during morning prayers. And you see it in the eyes of the priest, who has started to look more like a corpse every day. Gaunt, pale, sleepless. His robes are patched, and his breath rattles in his chest when he speaks. But he never stops, never skips a mass, never misses a funeral rite, even if the corpse is just another servant wrapped in a blanket and left in the corner. You're not especially religious. You weren't before the castle, but now you find yourself drawn to the chapel more often than not for comfort exactly, but for warmth. It's one of the few places that stays semi-consistently above freezing. The thick walls, the endless candles, the huddled bodies, they trap heat better than the dormitory ever could. So you go, you sit in the back behind the pews on the cold stone floor and you watch. You watch the priest stumble through scripture. You watch the nobles cross themselves with shaking hands. You watch a young girl carve a symbol into the wood of the pew with a bit of broken iron. You don't recognise the symbol, but it doesn't feel like something from the official handbook. There's a new kind of fear growing here, something older than saints and less polite than sermons. That brings us to a curious historical tidbit. In medieval winter, religion wasn't just a comfort, it was a schedule. The day revolved around prayers, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers and compline. Each had a time, each had a rhythm. It gave structure to the chaos. Even if your stomach was empty and your fingers purple with cold, you knew compline came after vespers. You knew mass came with sunrise. You knew something was still following a plan, even if it wasn't you. Of course, the nobility practiced a more decorative version of this routine. Their chapels were private, their prayers performed with embroidered books and velvet kneelers. You get none of that. Your chapel is drafty, and the hymns are sung in tones so off-key they sound like moaning. But it's still better than silence. One night you're woken by the bells. Not the regular ones, these ring long and low and they don't stop. You sit up, heart pounding, and see others stirring too. No one says anything. You throw on your cloak and follow the sound to the chapel. A body lies at the altar, not wrapped, not hidden, just there, pale and strange in the candlelight. It's one of the nobles. You recognise his boots, no one touches him. The priest is praying loudly, eyes closed, voice cracking. A few people join in, most just watch. It feels more like a warning than a ritual. You stand in the back, breath clouding the air. It's so cold the holy water is frozen into a dull lump in its basin. No one wants to be the first to leave. No one wants to be the first to move. The silence after the bell stop is worse than the ringing. Your fringe fact of the night? Some people believe that the dead could linger if not buried properly. In winter, when the ground was too frozen to dig, corpses might be kept above ground for weeks, sometimes in chapels, sometimes in storerooms, sometimes just near. It wasn't just unsettling. It was dangerous. Disease didn't care if you were reverent. Back in your chamber, no one speaks of it. The nobleman's boots are gone. Someone took them before the priests arrived. You pretend not to notice. You lie awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember the prayer they recited. In the days that follow, chapel attendance increases. More candles, more prayers, more desperate eyes. The priest now keeps a bowl of ashes by the door for anyone who wants to mark their foreheads. Half the castle walks around looking like mourners, even though no feast day calls for it. There's a scholarly debate here if you're in the mood. Some historians believe medieval religion was deeply personal, a source of real, soul-deep comfort. Others argue it was mostly social, a public performance for the sake of hierarchy and appearance. You think it's both, or maybe neither. Maybe it's just what's left when nothing else works. One evening you find a seat closer to the altar. The benches are worn smooth and you can see dozens of carvings in the wood. Names, symbols, prayers. Someone once scratched a full psalm into the backrest with a knife. You run your fingers along the letters like a blind person searching for meaning. The wind howls outside. Snow pushes against the stained glass windows, rattling them gently. The priest finishes his sermon and coughs for a full minute before stumbling back to his seat. The candles burn lower. The cold creeps in again. You stay just a little longer, not because you believe, but because it's warm and it's quiet, and for a little while you don't feel alone. It's funny, in a grim sort of way, that the one room in the castle everyone tries to avoid during most of the year becomes the place people sneak into during winter. The chapel, yes, that's for prayers and processions and occasional panic, but the real sanctuary, the one with the best chance of not freezing your eyelashes shut, that honour goes to the scriptorium. Technically, it's where the steward keeps records. Inventory scrolls, land titles, tax lists, guest registries, a few worm-nibbled manuscripts that no one's opened in years. But more importantly, it's the only room with a fireplace that's fed regularly and small enough to actually hold heat. You find yourself there more and more lately, under the pretense of assisting with document copying, which mostly means holding a candle and trying not to sneeze on parchment worth more than your teeth. The steward's clerk, Edwin, is a narrow, twitchy man with ink-stained fingers and the twitchy patience of a ferret. He doesn't like you, but he tolerates you. Probably because you never talk and always replace the quills where you found them. That alone makes you more reliable than half the staff right now. You perch on a stool near the fire, not too close. Edwin glares at anyone who breathes too heavily near the documents, and slowly let your bones thaw. The fire here doesn't roar, but it's steady, and the walls don't seem to sweat with cold the way the stone corridors do. It's dry, it's quiet, and mercifully it doesn't stink. Most people forget this room exists. That's by design. The nobles don't come down here unless they have to sign something. The cook wouldn't set foot in here unless it were on fire. And the guards, they can't read, so they assume it's cursed. It's the perfect place to catch your breath and pretend, just for a moment, that you live in a world where your socks aren't frozen to your toes. You glance around the room. Shelves line the walls, stacked with brittle scrolls and wooden boxes of seals and dried ink. The fire crackles gently. Edwin scratches away with a quill, lips moving silently as he copies a grain inventory from a sheaf that's older than both of you combined. It's peaceful in a way nothing else in the castle is, and you realise it's something strange. You're warm. That warmth isn't just physical either. It's the kind that lets your shoulders unclench, the kind that lets you feel tired instead of simply cold. You'd almost forgotten what that was like. You let out a breath you didn't realise you were holding. It comes out soft and fogless. That's how you know the room is holding heat. You want to stay here forever, or at least until spring. But Edwin has other ideas. He hands you a stack of wax tablets and a stylus, then points to a stool. "Don't scratch them," he mutters, "and don't smear the wax. If you're illiterate, just trace the letters I mark." You nod. You know your letters, barely, but you're not here to prove anything. You're here for the fire. As you work, you catch fragments of conversation drifting in from the hall. Rumours, always. Someone else taken ill. A monk arrived from a nearby abbey, bringing a relic. A rat was found dead in the water barrel, no one's drinking from it now. Another body was carted out before dawn, taken to the ice house to keep until the ground thaws. You hear these things and keep your head down. Edwin doesn't react. Chung, he's heard it all. Here's your historical nugget for the night. In some castles, the record rooms, or scriptoria, were considered among the safest places during a siege or plague. Why? Because they were dry, tightly sealed, and not full of rotting food or festering people. Of course, they were also stuffed with flammable material and had a roaring fire nearby, so, swings and roundabouts. Fringe fact? Some scribes used their own spit to thin ink in winter. When water froze, you worked with what you had. Edwin does it too when he thinks you're not looking. He licks the quill tip like it owes him money, then keeps scratching away. You try not to think about how many documents in history were written with literal spit. Now, let's wander into one of those classic scholarly debates. Was literacy in castles limited to the nobility and clergy? Or did more servants, stewards, and even guards know how to read than we assume? Some historians argue that basic literacy was surprisingly widespread, at least among castle administrators. Others insist reading was hoarded like a privilege, jealously guarded by the monks and lords. Based on Edwin's panic when you accidentally read a line aloud, you're guessing it still feels like contraband. You trace your letters, quiet as a mouse, stealing glances at the fire when Edwin's not looking, and slowly that ancient feeling creeps over you, the sense of being human again, not just a freezing animal, not just a body to feed and warm and keep upright, but a person, someone capable of thought, of creation, of meaning. It's fleeting, sure, but it's real, and in winter real is rare. A bell rings in the corridor, supper time, your stomach twists. You don't want to leave. Out there it's cold again, damp again, hard again. In here the fire glows like a memory of summer, and even the stale air tastes like comfort. But you stand, because staying too long would make Edwin twitchier than usual, and you need to keep the peace if you want to come back tomorrow. Before you go, you glance at one of the parchments Edwin left out. It's a prayer. A copy of a sermon, maybe. Something about suffering, redemption, patience in trials. The ink is mudded, but the message is clear. You trace the edge of the parchment with a finger and whisper the words once, quietly. Then you step back into the corridor, where the cold greets you like an old friend. But now, for the first time in days, you feel like you might outlast it. You learn the hard way that winter doesn't stop for war. It's early morning and the sun has barely risen, if you can call that pale grey smear sunlight. You're hauling firewood across the courtyard when you hear it, the sharp blare of a horn from the outer wall. Not the usual meals ready or someone's lost a chicken kind of blast, but the kind that sends every stable boy, maid and guard straight into a full sprint. Even the kitchen girls drop their buckets. Something's coming. You pause, heart kicking in against your ribs. Your first thought is wolves, then maybe a fire. But no, it's worse. There's a rider at the gates, covered in snow, face blackened with soot, bleeding from somewhere under his cloak. His horse is limping, its eyes rolling. He falls from the saddle before anyone even reaches him. But he gets the words out. They're coming. You don't know who they are yet, but the castle shifts instantly into something less like a home and more like a hive, buzzing, frantic, and ready to sting. Winter warfare is a special kind of stupid, and yet here you are, part of a garrison suddenly on alert. You aren't a soldier, you don't even pretend to be one. But when the gates get barred and the guards start loading crossbows, you understand that everyone is about to become something they're not. That includes you. Word spreads it's a neighbouring lord, one with a grudge and poor timing. He's taken offence at a land dispute. Or maybe it's about marriage or money or some insult no one remembers. The reasons don't matter. Only the fact that he's marching on a snow-choked road with 40 men and frozen rage in his heart. You're ordered to help move supplies. Salted meat, barrels of ale, whatever dried beans haven't gone soft with mildew. The kitchen is chaos. People shouting, dragging sacks, slipping on ice. You nearly get your hand crushed beneath a crate. Someone screams that there's not enough to last if it becomes a siege. The cook screams louder and tells them to pray harder. Here's a chilling historical fact. Winter warfare wasn't common, but when it happened, it was brutal. Supplies were scarce, mobility was low, and the cold was a weapon just as deadly as steel. Soldiers often died of exposure before they even reached the battle. But desperation makes fools out of commanders, and vengeance never waits for spring. You help carry arrows to the ramparts. They're cold to the touch, each one coated with a thin sheen of frost. The guards are wrapping them in cloth and dunking them in pitch. Fire arrows. The wind is sharp enough to slice your face and your fingers are stiff even through your mitts. One of the archers has frostbite on both hands. He's still trying to draw his bow. The lord is in the hall shouting orders, half in armour and a half in fury. His squire scrambles to buckle his greavesden, while a servant tries to press hot wine into his hand. The steward is counting coins with wild eyes. You see a priest arrive, muttering blessings over everyone who passes him. It doesn't feel comforting, it feels like last rites. A debate you once heard in the scriptorium surfaces now, uninvited. A scholar claimed that castles were never meant to actually fight in winter, that their defences relied more on weather than warfare. Snow, ice, distance, they were the real moat. But another argued that castles were just as dangerous in cold, maybe more so. With morale low and desperation high, everything becomes a weapon. You're starting to agree with both of them. You're given a job, torch duty, keep the braziers burning along the wall. Sounds simple, until you realise the wind keeps snuffing them out and your gloves are soaked from melted snow. You stumble along the battlements, relighting torches with a shaking hand, watching the forest beyond the castle for signs of movement. It's too quiet, too still. The snow falls in slow, lazy spirals, like it doesn't realise there's a battle brewing. And then, finally they arrive. Not with fanfare, not with trumpets or flags, just dark shapes emerging from the tree line, trudging through knee-high drifts, hunched over against the wind. They look more like beasts than men, wrapped in furs, faces covered, weapons slung low. There's maybe 30 of them, not 40, and they look as miserable as you feel. The castle doesn't panic, it doesn't need to. The gates are shut, the walls are thick, the archers take their positions. You see the lord climb the steps to the battlements, sword in hand, teeth bared in something between a snarl and a smile. He was bored, you realise. The cold was killing him too. Now he has a reason to live again. The enemy doesn't attack, not yet. They set up camp just beyond arrow range, torches dotting the snow like dying stars. It's a waiting game now. See who cracks first. Back inside, the mood tightens. Everyone walks quieter. Meals are served colder. No one lingers in corridors. You sleep with your boots on now, just in case. The guards rotate twice as fast. The horses whinny all night. Even the rats seem nervous. Here's your fringe detail of the day. During winter sieges, some defenders would toss dead animals, or worse, people, over the walls, hoping the stench would drive the attackers off or spread disease. You glance at the bodies stored in the root cellar, and wonder if someone's already had the same idea. You return to the wall at dawn. The enemy camp is still there, fires still burning, but no movement. You wonder if they froze in their sleep. You wonder if you'll be next. You cup your hands around your last torch, whispering a prayer you didn't even know you remembered. Winter's still in control, war is just a guest. The siege doesn't begin with a bang. It begins with nothing. No battle cry, no charge at the gates, no flaming arrows lighting up the night sky, just a slow suffocating silence that settles over the castle like a burial shroud. On the first day, everyone waits. The guards peer over the ramparts with narrowed eyes, half hoping for movement, half dreading it. The rest of the castle holds its breath. You can almost feel it in the air, the way the cold wraps tighter around your chest, pressing down, pressing in. The enemy doesn't move. They stay just out of reach, dark specks against the snow, smoke rising from their crude fires. It's the strangest standoff you've ever witnessed. You'd almost think they gave up and decided to camp nearby for the scenery, but you know better. They're waiting for you to run out of food. They're waiting for your fires to die out. They're waiting for the castle to turn on itself from the inside. Which frankly might not take very long. The kitchens are already rationing more tightly. Bread is being cut thinner. Barley stew is watered down until it's more like beige tea. The salted meat is being carefully inventoried and stashed in the steward's private cellar. You know this because you were the one sent to carry the key. It's hidden beneath the floorboards under a locked trapdoor covered with sacks of flour, so old they may qualify as fossils. And it's not just the food. The firewood is down to splinters. What little's left is doled out for cooking and keeping the Lord's solar warm enough to keep his joints from freezing. You've taken to burning old furniture, broken crates and, once, rather regretfully, a tapestry that used to hang in the guest wing. The flames didn't even make it all the way through before dying, coughing out soot like an insult. Historically speaking, this is the most dangerous part of a siege, the waiting. Most people assume the worst part is the violence, the storming of the gates, the flurry of blades, but that's over quickly. No, it's the boredom that kills you, the hunger, the paranoia, the lack of anything to do. Castle life is already monotonous in winter, but now it's like being buried alive inside your own home. You help patrol the walls now, because bodies are short and everyone has to pitch in. You shuffle up and down the battlements, boots slipping on frost, hands raw from gripping a torch that keeps going out. You glance over the wall every few steps and still, nothing. No siege engines, no ladders, just distant figures huddled around their fires, eating whatever they brought in their packs, probably warmer than you are. The Lord is losing patience. You see him pacing the great hall, snapping at servants, barking at the steward. He wants blood, he wants action, he wants a reason to justify why he's wearing a sword and stomping around in boots so shiny they reflect the firelight. But no one's attacking. Not yet. They don't have to. And now, here's your weird little historical footnote. During real medieval sieges, it wasn't unusual for someone inside the castle to secretly communicate with the enemy, smuggling notes out through latrines, bribing guards, even tying messages to arrows, and firing them into the castle with bribes attached. You look around at the people sharing your fire and wonder, could someone here be helping them? Or worse, planning to open the gates? The fear settles in, silent and infectious. People whisper in corners. Small groups form, then scatter when you pass. The guards start looking at each other too long. Food goes missing. A hunk of cheese vanishes from the cellar. Someone swears they saw a shadow moving across the courtyard last night. Outside the walls, there are no footprints. Doesn't matter. You sleep with a knife under your bedroll now, not because you expect to fight, but because you expect to be blamed. And then, 2 nights in, it happens. A scream breaks the stillness. Loud, human, painful. You bolt upright, cloak tangled around your legs, and scramble into the corridor. Others are already running. You follow the sound to the western tower, where 2 guards stand panting, weapons drawn. A 3rd man lies at the bottom of the stairs, neck twisted at an impossible angle, eyes wide and frozen. He tried to leave, snuck out through a supply tunnel that no one had used in years. You remember hearing about it, an old escape route that led under the moat. Not exactly a well-kept secret, but definitely sealed. Or so everyone thought. Apparently not. The man had pried open the rusted gate with a chisel, squeezed through, and made it maybe 20 feet before slipping on the ice and breaking his neck. That's the official story. Whether it's true or not, you'll never know. No one wants to talk about it. They seal the tunnel again with iron nails and a wall of stones. The Lord orders it watched, though no one volunteers. Eventually 2 boys are assigned the post, barely old enough to lift a sword between them. You bring them extra cloaks from the laundry. One of them is crying. You don't ask why. And now we come to the scholarly dispute. Were castles really defensible in a siege, or were they mostly for show? Some say the high walls, narrow gates and food stores were enough to hold out indefinitely. Others argue that most sieges ended in surrender from within, because morale cracked before the stone did. After just 3 days of this, you're starting to lean toward the second camp. By the end of the week, things have changed. People speak less. Meals are quiet. Everyone eats facing inward, toward the fire, like they're afraid of what might be waiting outside the walls, or worse, inside them. You catch the priest sharpening a dagger behind the chapel. When he sees you, he just shrugs. Faith without works is dead, he says, as if that explains everything. You nod and back away. No one knows how long the enemy plans to wait. No one knows if reinforcements are coming. No one knows how many meals are left in the pantry. But you do know this. The snow is falling harder, the walls are colder, and the castle is holding its breath, waiting for the next sound, the next scream, the next crack. You sleep that night with your back to the wall, eyes open, watching the shadows move. You wouldn't think romance could bloom in a place where your breath fogs indoors and your underclothes haven't been truly dry in weeks. But then again, desperation makes for strange bedfellows. In a castle locked down under snow, starvation, and the looming threat of siege, even affection becomes an act of rebellion. So yes, people still fall in love, or something that closely resembles it. But you quickly learn that in winter, love is a lot less about roses and poetry, and a lot more about shared warmth and someone who won't steal your blanket. It starts subtle, as most things do in the castle. A look held a second too long. A piece of bread passed from one hand to another without a word. A late-night conversation by the fire, voices low and conspiratorial, cloaked in steamed sam from the nearby stew pot. You see it happening between two of the younger servants, a girl from the kitchens and a stable boy with red cheeks and rough hands. They sit closer than necessary. She laughs at things he says that aren't funny. He gives her the choicest scrap of meat from his bowl. You've seen this dance before. You don't blame them, not even a little. In a world stripped of colour and comfort, affection is one of the few things that still feels alive. Even if it's short-lived, even if it ends badly, and it often does. Castle love stories don't get embroidered into tapestries. They get whispered in gossip and covered up when someone's belly starts to swell. There's no privacy here, so the idea of intimacy is almost laughable. Every room is shared, every corridor has ears, walls are thin, and beds are communal. So the act of slipping a hand under someone's cloak becomes bold, subversive. Just looking at someone the wrong way can get you lashed if the lord's in a bad mood or the steward's feeling righteous. Still, people take risks, and sometimes the risks catch up with them. You hear the shouting one morning before breakfast. In the hall near the stairwell, a guard is screaming at a maid, red-faced, spitting curses that turn to mist in the air. She's sobbing, shaking, her apron twisted in her fists. He accuses her of lying, of seduction, betrayal, spreading her favours like a plague. She accuses him right back, loud and furious, of promises made and then broken. Everyone watches. No one steps in. Eventually the steward drags them apart and banishes the girl to the laundry for the rest of the season. The guard is docked his meals for a week. Quietly, someone slips the girl a strip of wool and a crust of bread later that night. You don't ask who. Here's the historical fact no one really likes to talk about. In medieval castles, the rules around love and sex were brutal and mostly one-sided. Noblemen had near total freedom. Servants, meanwhile, could be punished severely for so much as looking at someone the wrong way, especially if the object of affection belonged to someone with power. Women bore the brunt, always. Reputations were fragile, forgiveness rare. Still, some relationships were sanctioned, usually behind closed doors, quietly acknowledged with a blind eye from the steward. A servant couple might be granted a shared pallet, or at least not separated. Others met in storerooms, haylofts, or even the chapel during the off hours, whispering words that sounded holy but weren't. You learn fast that warmth makes people reckless. When the nights are long and your bones ache, a body beside you can mean more than a dozen prayers. You don't even need words, just the weight of someone against your back, a hand near yours, breathing that doesn't belong to a rat or a coughing man. It's not romantic. It's not even always mutual, but it keeps you human. You hear about the lady of the castle having a lover, a knight who tends the western rampart. It's spoken in hushed tones, with eyes darting around. They say he enters her chambers after midnight through the servants' passage. They say her husband suspects nothing. They say he does, but he doesn't care. You don't know what's true, and you don't dare find out. But you do wonder, is it love? Or just the kind of deal people make when survival is a daily negotiation? Here's your fringe fact for the night. Medieval love tokens were rarely rings or flowers. Sometimes it was a lock of hair, braided and tied into cloth. Sometimes it was a belt or garter, passed secretly under the table. One boy gave his girl a polished chicken bone once, shaped into a crude heart. You saw her crying over it 2 days later, after he slipped on the outer stairs and broke his neck. Scholars love to debate the nature of medieval romance. Was it all courtly love and chaste glances, or was it mostly pragmatic, transactional, born of isolation and necessity? Most likely it was both. The poetry came from the nobles, but the passion came from the desperate. You can't eat a sonnet, but you can cling to someone under a blanket and make it to morning. One night you share your pallet with someone. You don't plan it, you're just both near the fire, too tired to move, and there's only one dry cloak between you. So you curl beneath it, awkward and silent at first. Your backs touch, then your hands, no words, just the shared understanding that the world outside that blanket doesn't care if you make it to morning, but inside for just a little while someone else does. You don't talk about it later. You don't need to, but that night you sleep better than you have in weeks, and when you wake for once, you're not cold. The children are quieter now. That's how you know it's getting worse. A castle in winter is usually full of their sounds, crying, laughing, arguing, chasing chickens. getting underfoot, getting scolded. Even during the coldest stretches, there's usually a baby somewhere shrieking like a goat or a toddler slipping on ice while someone yells at them in 3 different dialects. But now, the silence hangs like frost on the rafters. You don't even realise at first that they're gone. They're small, forgettable in the shuffle of day-to-day survival. But one morning you go to the kitchens and there's no line of grubby hands reaching for crusts, no chubby cheeks smeared with stew, no one getting smacked for trying to steal a strip of turnip. You glance around and feel something cold that has nothing to do with the weather. One of the kitchen girls, Mira, sees you looking and gives a small shake of her head. She doesn't say anything, she just pulls her apron tighter and turns away. The truth settles into the cracks of the castle like the wind. The children are dying. Not all at once, not loudly, it's a slow unravelling. One gets a cough that doesn't go away, another stops eating. A third wakes up covered in sweat and doesn't wake up again. There's no fever big enough to warrant a full panic, just enough to drain them, inch by inch. The priest says their little bodies can't handle the cold, the physician says their humours are too wet, the cook says they need more fat in their bellies. Everyone's probably right, or everyone's wrong. Either way, they keep vanishing. A historical fact to chill your bones. In medieval Europe, child mortality rates were astronomical. In some regions, 1 out of every 3 children didn't survive past age 5. Winters were especially cruel. Illness, starvation and exposure took out the youngest first. Castles were no exception. Nobility might have had fancier cradles, but the air was just as cold and no amount of silk could stop a lung from filling with fluid. You remember a boy named Ewan? 5, maybe 6. He used to sneak scraps to the castle dogs even when he hadn't eaten himself. Bright eyes, big laugh. He'd spin around in the snow until he fell over, dizzy and giggling. He stopped showing up at meals 3 days ago. You ask someone in the corridor if they've seen him. They glance away. That night you spot a bundle being carried out of the servant's wing, wrapped in cloth small enough to be held in one arm. No one says the name. You don't have to. And then there's the infants, the ones born just before winter started. One of the laundresses, barely older than you, gave birth in late November. She worked right up until the child came, then returned to folding linens 3 days later. You saw the baby once, red and squalling, tucked inside a sling against her chest. Now the sling hangs empty. She still wears it. Out of habit, grief, maybe both. A few children are still here, but they're different now. Thinner, quieter. Their eyes too large for their faces. They don't run or play anymore. They cling to corners, watching with a kind of dull, tired curiosity. One girl, Answer, sits by the hearth with a wooden spoon she won't let go of. No one knows why. When you ask, she says, "It's warm." You don't press further. You help with the children when you can, feeding, wrapping blankets, wiping noses. It doesn't do much, but it gives you something to do besides watching people die. One boy, barely 4, curls into your side while you peel onions. He doesn't talk, just nestles there like a kitten. You let him. It's the warmest you've been all week, and yet love and effort don't always save them. A fringe fact to make your skin crawl. Some medieval communities believed that sick children were being stolen by fairies. Changelings, they called them. The real child was taken, they said, and replaced with a sickly imitation. It was a way to explain wasting illness, especially in infants. Some families did terrible things trying to bring back the original child. You've heard stories. You don't want to know which ones are true. The priest starts performing more blessings over the remaining children. He touches their heads with holy oil, murmurs Latin phrases, holds out relics wrapped in velvet. One girl sneezes during the ritual, and he recoils like she sapped him. The next day she's gone. There's a scholarly argument buried deep in your memory, one you overheard while sweeping the scriptorium. Something about whether medieval society loved children the same way we do today. One side insisted that high mortality rates led to emotional detachment. Why get attached to something that might not survive the season? The other side argued that loss doesn't make love smaller, only sharper. Watching the way the laundress still touches her empty sling, you know which side you believe. You start sleeping with your back to the nursery wall. Not because it's warm, it's not, but because it feels like maybe your presence means something. One of the children cries softly in the night. You wake, listen, and hear someone singing. A lullaby. Off-key. The cook's assistant, maybe. She's barely old enough to know the words, but she sings anyway. The days go on. More gaps at the hearth. More small blankets left folded and untouched. More names you don't say out loud anymore. And yet the children that remain keep going. You see one trying to build a castle out of frozen turnips in the kitchen. Another taps on the frost-covered window with a stick, laughing at his own reflection. They're not giving up. Not yet. Neither are you. You press a bowl of hot broth into a child's hands and watch her cradle it like treasure. She sips once, sighs, and leans against you. Just that small moment. Warmth, touch, life. It's not a victory, but it's enough. For tonight. At some point during the siege, or maybe just the season, you stop being surprised by what ends up sharing your bed. You've gotten used to fleas, of course. Mice no longer scare you. Rats are just roommates with no manners. But now, with the cold at its sharpest and the walls groaning like tired giants, the castle has officially welcomed its most chaotic houseguests yet. The animals. Yes, the animals are indoors now, not just the working dogs and the occasional cat perched on a windowsill like it owns the place. No, we're talking chickens in the pantry, goats in the chapel vestibule, and pigs, actual pigs, snoring beside the hearth like they paid rent. The stable is frozen over in places, the straw brittle with frost, the air sharp enough to make your nose bleed. So the livestock has been invited inside. Not into the Great Hall, obviously, though a goose did make a very aggressive appearance there yesterday, but into the servant quarters, storage rooms, and pretty much any space not already filled with sick bodies or pickled turnips. At first, it's chaos. Feathers everywhere, goat droppings in the corridor, a rooster that seems to have misunderstood every rule of when to crow and now does it hourly, especially when people are trying to sleep. You nearly stepped on a hen this morning while getting out of bed. She was nestled in your cloak, laid an egg, and then had the audacity to look offended when you moved. But then gradually you realise something. The animals bring heat. Body heat, to be specific. A pig, while not much to look at and even less pleasant to smell, is basically a portable furnace. You sit near one during a freezing evening and feel your toes defrost for the first time in days. Chickens huddle in baskets, puffed up and warm, their bodies radiating a quiet steadiness that feels like an act of mercy. Even the cats, smug and unbothered, seem to make the room more livable. It becomes a kind of unspoken agreement. You don't kick them, you don't yell, you share space, and in return you get a few degrees of comfort, a little noise that isn't moaning or praying, and the rare delight of a warm egg. Now for a historical twist. This wasn't uncommon. In fact, in many medieval households, especially in rural manors and castles during harsh winters, it was normal to keep animals indoors. The same creatures that gave milk, meat and eggs were often part of the domestic space during the cold months. There simply wasn't a choice. Better to have a goat in the corner than to lose it to frostbite outside. You don't know whether to feel comforted or deeply depressed by this fact. There's a piglet in particular you've taken a liking to. No name, you're not that sentimental, but he's small, pink and constantly in trouble. You've caught him chewing on boots, knocking over firewood, and once somehow licking the condensation off a wine barrel. But when you curl up near him at night, he grunts softly and shifts just enough to make room. It's the closest you've had to a bedtime routine in weeks. The cat population has doubled, maybe tripled. No one knows where they came from. Cats just appear. They take over rafters, windowsills, corners near the oven. They prowl like royalty, stealing warmth, and acting like they invented the idea of comfort. The cook tolerates them, barely, because they kill rats, or at least scare them off. You swear one of them winked at you the other night before stealing a piece of fish off your plate. And the dogs? Well, they've been inside the longest. No one questions their place. They lie beside fires, under tables, near sick babies, and sometimes on top of people who are too weak to push them off. There's a mastiff that guards the main stairwell, as if he's been assigned to it by God himself. No one goes up or down without offering him a scratch behind the ears or a bit of crust. Your fringe fact of the evening: in some castle records, dogs were actually listed as servants, especially if they performed useful tasks. Herding, guarding, hunting. They were sometimes given names in the official household roles. Not always nice names, mind you. There's one record of a dog named Filthnose, but names nonetheless, which means, technically, Filthnose got more recognition than most of the people currently huddling by the kitchen hearth. The chapel is perhaps the strangest of all now. Once cold, solemn, echoing, it's taken on a new life. The priest still holds his services. Of course, though he does so with a hen clucking behind him and a lamb bleating softly every few minutes. The altar is untouched, but the space just behind the pews has been converted into a makeshift nursery for sick livestock. And oddly, it feels more sacred now. Warm. Alive. Maybe God doesn't mind sharing space with a few creatures of his own making. There's a scholarly disagreement you heard once from a friar passing through in the fall. He said the line between humans and animals in medieval thought was blurrier than modern people imagine. That animals weren't just beasts, they were companions, symbols, omens, even spiritual messengers. Another scholar scoffed and called that romanticised nonsense. A pig is a pig, he had said. You eat it or you waste it. But you're not so sure. When that little piglet curls against your side at night, snoring softly, it doesn't feel like waste. You've grown used to stepping over chickens, sidestepping goats, sharing space with cats. At this point you can tell which dog snores the loudest and which hen will peck you if you sit in her corner. You've even named the rooster Grim because of his unfortunate timing and complete lack of cheer. But it's not just about warmth, is it? There's something deeper happening. In the quiet hours when the castle breathes together, all the humans, the animals, the fires, the silence, you realise you're part of something communal, something primal. Everyone, no matter how many legs they have, is just trying to make it to spring. Survival has flattened the hierarchy. No one's above sleeping next to a pig now, not even the lady of the castle, who was recently spotted stroking a lamb while whispering prayers under her breath. That night, you sleep pressed between two other servants and the piglet, with Grim roosting overhead. You dream of open fields, of sun on your face, of the animals grazing in real grass. When you wake, it's still winter, but it doesn't feel quite as lonely. You'd think the castle would be asleep by now. It's nearly midnight. The wind outside is howling with that particular pitch that sounds like something is screaming far off in the hills, and every shutter is rattling like it's trying to rip itself loose. Inside, the fires are dying low, the stew pots have gone quiet, and most bodies are tucked beneath whatever layer of cloth, animal, or human warmth they can scavenge. But the castle doesn't sleep. Not really. Not ever. You learn this quickly. Winter just means it sleeps with one eye open. There are guards still walking the parapets, boots echoing against frozen stone, the occasional cough or muttered curse breaking the silence. Their torches flare and flicker in the wind, shadows stretching across the white-dusted courtyard like ghostly fingers. They check the gates, then the walls, then the sky, always scanning, always squinting, always waiting for something that might not come. Or might. You're not officially one of them, of course, but during siege times, roles blur. You're handed a torch and told to make rounds on the inner keep. Not because anyone thinks you'll stop an attack, but because it helps to have more eyes, more ears, more feet making noise in the dark to keep it from creeping in. So now you patrol, not out on the walls, but inside, through the corridors, past storerooms, down into the undercroft. You walk the same route every night, a narrow loop through chilled stone and tighter air. Your torch smokes and hisses. Every few minutes you pause and listen. What are you listening for exactly? Hard to say. The castle creaks constantly. Wind moans through arrow slits. Mice rustle in the rushes. And somewhere in the old wine cellar, something drips. Every single night. Drip, drip, drip. You once tried to find the source, but after 2 hours and a broken sandal strap, you gave up and now just pretend it's part of the ambience. It's strange how awake everything feels in winter. You'd expect the castle to hibernate like a bear, curling inward, waiting for the sun to return. But instead it hums. Maybe it's the cold, so biting, so sharp that no one can fully relax. Maybe it's the fear of sickness, of the siege, of hunger. Maybe it's the knowledge that every breath could be your last, and sleeping through it feels unwise. Even the walls breathe. You swear they do. They expand and contract with the cold groaning and cracking as ice forms between their stones. It's not imagination. Stone moves. It has to. Otherwise it breaks. In one of the upper chambers, you pass two figures huddled near a brazier. Messengers, you think, or maybe leftover squires. They nod when you pass, faces pale in the firelight. They've drawn crude playing cards in the dirt with a bit of charcoal and are betting using chicken bones. You consider sitting down with them but keep walking. You're not ready to be still yet. Here's something to chew on. Many medieval castles had staff up at all hours, especially during the winter months. Someone had to tend the fires, check for drafts, prevent theft, stop the livestock from wandering into places they weren't supposed to be. Castles were never truly closed. They were living things, loud, restless, and a little moody, like old animals that didn't know when to lie down. Even in the kitchens, was always someone. A pot left to simmer. A fire stoked low. a maid curled against the oven wall, snoring softly. You walk past her and adjust the draped blanket so her feet are covered. It's not kindness exactly, it's just instinct. You know what bare toes feel like in this cold. There's a scholarly debate you once overheard in the scriptorium. Two dusty old men arguing about whether castles in winter were quieter than usual or louder. One argued that the cold silenced everything, made people retreat into stillness. The other claimed winter amplified every creak, cough and whisper, making the building feel haunted. After enough midnight walks like this, you're firmly on team haunted. You reach the chapel last. It's never locked, never empty. The priest is asleep in the corner, wrapped in layers, a candle still burning on the altar. A couple of dogs lie near the embers. One lifts its head when you enter, then settles again. You move quietly past the pews, nodding toward the statue of St. Brigid, whose face is half covered in shadow. You leave the room unchanged. You turn back towards the stairwell. This is the coldest part of the route. There's a draft here that bites through everything, cloak, skin, bone. You brace yourself and walk faster. The torch flickers wildly, then steadies. You pass by the door to the solar and hear a woman crying. Just one soft sound, then nothing. You don't stop. And then, as you descend back to your sleeping area, something unexpected. Laughter. You freeze. Not loud laughter, not manic, just a low chuckle. A tired human sound. You follow it and find two young guards huddled around a tiny brazier near the west stair. One of them is telling a story, something about a goat and a nobleman's missing hat. It's absurd, it's barely funny, but it makes you smile. The warmth of it cuts deeper than the fire. Fringe fact of the evening? In some winter courts, guards were rotated not just for duty, but for morale. It was believed that if a man laughed during his shift, even once, he was less likely to abandon his post. Laughter wasn't just tolerated, it was strategic. You stand there a moment, just listening, just remembering that people are still people, even now, even here. Then you keep walking. Your patrol ends near the kitchens again. You extinguish your torch, ease yourself onto a stool near the oven, and wait for the cold to find you. But for a little while the castle stays quiet. Not dead, not broken, just alive in the dark, and you see her in the corridor and she's shivering. It catches you off guard. Not because she's cold, but because she's the lady of the castle and she's shivering like the rest of you. Her cloak is heavy velvet, trimmed in fox fur, and her boots are stitched leather lined with rabbit skin. But it doesn't matter. The cold doesn't care. It seeps through silk and bone all the same. She doesn't see you watching, or if she does, she pretends not to. Her face is pale, lips tinged grey. She clutches a folded letter in one gloved hand, and the hand is trembling. You expect a steward or maid to trail behind her, but no one comes. She moves alone through the hall, the shadows swallowing her up. For a moment she looks almost like a ghost, something unfinished, wandering through a place that's grown too small for her grief. It's the first time you've seen her up close since the siege began. Before that she would pass occasionally, surrounded by fabric and attendants, a painting come to life. But now she looks like someone who hasn't slept in days, whose prayers have gone unanswered, who's started to understand that titles don't insulate you from hunger or fear or silence. Later you overhear the kitchen girls whispering. The lady's daughter is ill, feverish, won't eat, pale as snow. They say the lady hasn't left her side in 2 days. They say the child cries out in Latin, when the fever spikes. Others say she doesn't cry at all anymore, just lies there, eyes fluttering, skin so hot it steams. You don't know what's true, but that night you see a fire blazing in the lady's solar brighter than any other in the castle, and the smoke smells faintly of lavender and beeswax. Someone's trying everything. There's a strange satisfaction in realizing that nobility suffers too. You're not proud of it, but it's there. You've grown up with the idea that they float above the rest of you, untouchable, cushioned, immune. But winter levels the field. It doesn't care about bloodlines. It doesn't care about your coat of arms or your wine collection. It strips everything away until all that's left is bone and breath. There's a historical irony here. While castles were built as fortresses, symbols of wealth and power, many noble women were prisoners of their own privilege. The lady of the castle might have furs and servants, but she also had expectations. Decorum, composure, quiet suffering. She couldn't scream, couldn't curse, couldn't break. But now you're hearing stories. She screamed when the child convulsed. She threw a goblet at the wall last night. Silver. Left a dent. She struck a maid who suggested the child might be better off with the saints. Maybe you'd have done worse. You start noticing the small things she's lost. The braids in her hair have grown messy. Her rings are fewer, pawned perhaps, or slipped off in a panic. Her dresses are simpler, sleeves stained. Once, you pass her in the stairwell and she doesn't even flinch when a rat scurries past. The lady of the castle doesn't blink at vermin anymore. One afternoon you're called to deliver extra firewood to her chambers. It's an honour, technically. The steward picks you because you don't talk much, and you're clean, relatively speaking. You climb the stairs slowly, arms loaded, trying not to look at the wall tapestries, the ones showing bright hunts and summer meadows now faded, damp with mould. You knock once and a maid opens the door. Her eyes are red. She says nothing, just steps aside. Inside it's warm, unnaturally so. Fires on both sides of the room. The heat punches your face, you start sweating immediately. The lady sits in a high-backed chair beside the bed, her body hunched, hands clenched in her lap. She doesn't turn around. The child lies in the bed, small and still, a sheen of sweat glistening across her forehead. You place the wood beside the hearth and retreat, silent as a breath. Just before the door closes, you hear the lady whisper something. It's not a prayer, it's just the child's name. You don't sleep that night. Not because of the cold, but because you can't stop thinking about her voice. It was soft and low, but it held something sharp. Not anger, not grief, something deeper. A sound you imagine a bird might make right before throwing itself from the sky. There's a scholarly debate that floats back to you, one you heard in the scriptorium long ago. It was about medieval women and how much agency they truly had. Some claim they were powerless, always controlled by fathers, brothers, husbands. Others argued that within the walls of a castle, especially during crisis, women wielded quiet, fierce influence. That they could command loyalty, shape decisions, carry entire households on their shoulders without ever being seen. Tonight, you believe the second argument. The next morning, the child is still alive, just barely. The lady doesn't leave her chamber, but a tray of untouched food is returned to the kitchen. The maid who brought it whispers that the lady hasn't eaten in 2 days. No one says anything. The cook simply ladles more broth and sets it aside. By the end of the week, the child begins to stir again. Small movements, a twitch of the hand. Her lips move, and though the words are slurred, they're not Latin anymore. The fever breaks like a storm clearing at sea suddenly, with no warning, just gone. The lady weeps openly without shame, holding the child's hand like it's made of glass. And then, just as quietly, she rises, straightens her dress, puts her rings back on, replats her hair. No dramatic return, no speech. She simply becomes herself again, but different, sharpened, hardened. You watch her walk past you days later with her head high, her child's hand in hers, and realise the castle isn't just surviving. It's being rebuilt, brick by trembling brick, by the quiet strength of someone who refuses to break. You think maybe that's the real lesson of winter. Strength isn't loud, it doesn't shout or boast, it endures. It holds. It loves even when it's freezing. And sometimes it shivers just like you. You don't hear the monks arrive. You feel them. It starts with the heavy creak of the main gate being drawn open just enough to let in a huddled line of dark, swaying shapes. Then the murmurs ripple through the castle. The monks are here. They've come down from the abbey on the hill, a place so cold and desolate it makes your frozen chamber look like a tavern. Word is, they brought supplies. Word is, they brought prayers. Word is, they brought something worse. You rush to the courtyard, not because you're curious, but because someone tells you to. Everyone wants to see them. Even the guards who should be watching the siege lines step down from the battlements to gawk. Because no one's seen the monks since before winter closed its fist around the valley. And now they're here, 8 of them, maybe 9, wrapped in wool robes so thick they look like ambulatory blankets. Their hoods are pulled down low, feet bare in cracked leather sandals, and their breath fogs in perfect unison as they trudge across the courtyard. They say nothing, not to the steward, not to the priest, not even to the cook who runs out with a half-frozen hunk of bread. They're not silent by a vow, they're silent because they choose to be, and honestly, after one look at their faces, you understand why. They look half dead, skin like parchment, eyes sunken and red, lips chapped until they bleed. These aren't the serene monks from summer walking the herb garden and humming hymns. These are winter creatures, hollowed out by cold and something deeper. Their leader, a tall man with frost in his beard and a deep scar across his cheek, steps forward and hands a scroll to the steward. No words, just parchment. The steward reads it and nods, his face going grey under the firelight. Whatever's written there, it isn't good. You later hear whispers. The abbey has suffered. They've lost more than half their number. Frostbite, illness, a collapsed roof. One monk was eaten by wolves, another died trying to thaw out the cistern. Supplies are gone, their firewood is gone, and worst of all, their chapel collapsed under snow. They've come here not as saviours but survivors, and now the castle has to make room for them. You're assigned to the chapel, of course, because fate has a cruel sense of humour. You're told to help make space, clear out the sick animals, rearrange the pews, and try not to disturb anything sacred in the process, which is hard when a goat has made a bed of the altar steps and a chicken is nesting in the holy water font. The monks settle in without complaint. They kneel in prayer for hours at a time, their voices low and monotone, humming through the stone walls like a lullaby for ghosts. They don't flinch when the wind rattles the windows. They don't beg for food. They don't even blink when someone sneezes blood in the corner. They just keep praying. It's eerie, but somehow comforting. You bring them water and receive a nod. You bring them bread and get a whispered bless you. Their leader smiles once at a servant girl who stumbles and drops a bucket of ashes. She nearly faints on the spot. You don't blame her. That smile carries the weight of a funeral procession. There's a historical footnote buried in your memory. Monastic orders were often called upon during times of crisis, famines, plagues, wars. They were the spiritual shock troops, cloistered during peace but active when things went wrong, and things clearly have gone wrong. And now the fringe detail that makes your stomach twist. In some records, monks were believed to be immune to certain plagues because of their vows, their purity, their routine of fasting and prayer. But in truth, they often died just as horribly as everyone else, just with better records of it. The abbey logs the deaths. The castle just buries them quietly. One night you sit at the back of the chapel, too tired to sleep, too cold to move. The monks are chanting again, a low, even rhythm, Latin mostly. Something about light in darkness. You don't understand all the words, but the tone is what matters. It pulls something tight in your chest. You stare at the altar, the wax pooled on the floor, the goat sleeping in a corner. You wonder if God is watching. You wonder if he's as cold as the rest of you. Then you glance at the monk nearest you. He's barely older than you, face soft despite the frostbite scarring his lips. His hands are raw, his knees tremble from kneeling too long. But he's smiling. Not broadly, just a small stubborn smile like he knows something the rest of you don't. You don't ask what it is, you just sit a little closer to the fire and let the chant wash over you. There's a scholarly debate about monastic suffering, whether it was chosen or simply tolerated, whether the monks found meaning in pain or if they just endured it out of necessity. But watching them now, you realise it doesn't matter. The difference between willing and unwilling fades when the cold gets deep enough. They're not here to save anyone, they're here to last, that's all. The next morning one of them doesn't wake up. They wrap him in wool and carry him to the cellar. No wailing, no prayers, just quiet. The fire in the chapel burns a little hotter that day. You sit beside it and rub your hands together until you feel them again. The monks say nothing, but they keep praying, and somehow that feels like hope. You've always known the castle had secrets. Everyone does. There are too many corridors, too many stairwells that end in nothing, doors that stay locked no matter how many keys you find, echoes that don't seem to belong to anything living. But now, with winter, grinding everything down to its bare bones and the siege dragging on like a bad dream, the castle's secrets aren't just rumours, they're surfacing, one by one, like bones rising through thawing earth. It starts with a sill, not the usual kind. Not the rank stench of the latrines, or the musty rot of damp rushes, or even the fermented miasma of unwashed bodies. This is sharper, metallic, like rust, but heavier. A smell that makes you pause in your tracks in the southern stairwell, torch raised, eyes narrowing. You follow it without meaning to, down a few worn steps, past the wall where ivy once grew, dead now, black and clinging like veins. You hesitate at the bottom, where the stone narrows and the air grows stale. There's a door here. You've passed it a dozen times. It never opened. Until tonight. Now it's cracked just wide enough to notice. You know you should report it. The steward would want to know. The guards would probably hammer the thing shut. But curiosity is louder than caution tonight. So you slip in, just for a moment, just to look. It's a passage, narrow, low. Not much more than a tunnel, really, carved crudely into the rock. You raise your torch and watch the shadows stretch forward like they're beckoning. The smell grows stronger. You almost turn back, but your feet keep moving. 10 steps in, the air changes. Colder somehow. You realise you're breathing mist again, even though you're underground. And then you see it. Another chamber. Small, round. A fire pit long extinguished. Bones. Lots of bones. Some animal, some not. You stop moving, you listen. Nothing but your own breath. Then you spot the carvings on the wall. Deep, jagged lines forming shapes you don't recognise. Not runes, not letters, just marks, repetitive, frantic, like someone was trying to carve their way through the stone or leave a message or curse something. You take one step back, and then the wind moves behind you. It shouldn't be possible. There's no opening, no tunnel beyond this, but the air brushes your neck, just a wisp, cold as river ice, and your torch flickers. You spin around. Nothing. Still, you don't wait to investigate. You're already halfway down the corridor before you remember how to breathe again. You don't tell anyone, not at first. What would you even say? That there's a hidden room filled with bones and bad air? That something might be living, or worse, not quite living down there? The castle is already cracking under the weight of winter. If you shout haunted tunnel in the Great Hall, you'll end up with a broom closet to sleep in and no stew rations for a week. So you keep quiet. But now you start noticing other things. A whisper through a keyhole when no one's standing. Footprints in corridors that haven't been used in months. A servant girl waking up screaming because she dreamt she was buried beneath the floor and could feel the dirt pressing on her chest. You try to laugh it off. Everyone's cold, hungry, frightened. It's natural for minds to fray at the edges. Still, you stop going near the southern stairwell. And then a boy disappears. Young, maybe 12. A scullery lad with more freckles than sense. Gone between shifts. No one saw him leave. No one saw him at all. You hear someone whisper that he was taken by the tunnels. The steward scoffs. The priest snaps at anyone repeating heathen nonsense. But later that night a second door is nailed shut. Quietly, without announcement. The castle isn't just old, it's layered. Built on ruins, a Norman shell grafted onto Saxon roots. Itself probably swallowing something Roman or older still. This place has held people for centuries. And not all of them were well-fed, well-meaning or particularly sane. Here's your historical fact to keep you up to night. Castle foundations often incorporated whatever was already there. Pagan sites, burial mounds, abandoned wells, and no one thought twice about it. They just built on top, said a few prayers, and assumed that stone would keep the bad things down. But stone forgets nothing. It remembers footsteps, screams, blood, fringe detail. In the early 13th century, a castle in the north was built atop a plague pit. The bones kept shifting during construction. Rather than rebury them, the builders mixed the bones into the mortar. People said the walls moaned during storms. The castle burned down a few years later. No one rebuilt. There's a scholars' debate buried here too, though few dare voice it. Were castles just homes and fortresses, or were they repositories? Places to hold things, dangerous things, lost knowledge, cursed relics, unspoken histories, secrets too old or heavy to carry forward. The kind of things you hide, then forget, until winter wakes them up. You don't visit the tunnel again. You barely walk near that side of the keep anymore. But you dream of it. Stone beneath your fingernails, a room with no ceiling, a breath on your neck, and once, a voice. You can't be sure what it says. The syllables twist like frost, sharp and melting at once. But when you wake, your palms are clenched, your throat dry, and the candle beside your bed is blown out. No wind, no open window, just smoke curling up into the rafters like a question you're afraid to ask. Maybe the castle doesn't sleep because it's watching, and maybe the walls whisper not because they're old, but because they remember what happened last time. The snow finally stops falling. It's not dramatic. There's no trumpet blast, no golden sunrise lighting up the world in triumph. You don't even notice it at first. It's only when you step outside to fetch water and realise your boots don't sink that it hits you. The storm has passed. The snow lies in heavy uneven drifts, glistening like something asleep, but the sky above is clear, Still grey, still dull, but clear. You can see the edges of clouds now, not just a choking white mass. And somewhere beyond the forest there's the faintest glow. Not quite sun, but not sun either. You tell no one. It's not out of selfishness, it's self-preservation. Because hope, real, tangible hope, is dangerous. It sets expectations, it invites disappointment. And in winter, especially a winter like this, disappointment can break people faster than starvation. Still, the change creeps in, quietly, like a draft, but in reverse. You notice the guards on the battlements speaking louder now. Not laughing, not yet, but telling stories again. You hear one of them cursing in a way that almost sounds cheerful. In the kitchens, the cook lifts the lid of the stew pot and sighs like she's letting something out, not just keeping things in. A girl humming while sweeping near the laundry. A boy sliding across the courtyard ice and not being beaten for it. The animals feel it too. The dogs are restless, tails wagging more often. The pigs grunt with something that might resemble cheer. The chickens are laying again. Not much, but enough to give the cook something to count. The cat that sleeps in the chapel window has started to sun herself when the light hits just right. You caught her yawning yesterday, mouth wide, as if preparing for spring. It's not over, of course. There's still snow piled high against the lower windows. The siege camp still sits beyond the tree line, smoke curling up into the still air. The food stores are stretched to near fantasy. And yet, there's motion now. Possibility. The monks feel it most. They say little, as always, but they move faster now. Their prayers have changed tone. Less like mourning, more like invocation. They carry water without shuffling. They stack firewood with rhythm. The head monk even smiles, once, briefly, like a crack in stone that you almost missed. A historical curiosity, the first thaw was often considered a sacred threshold in medieval life. Festivals didn't wait for actual warmth. They began as soon as change was felt. The Feast of the Purification Candlemas, even the remnants of pagan in bulk, all mark the liminal space between surviving and living again. Not spring, just the idea of spring. That was enough. You've never understood that until now. The steward calls a meeting, not a grand one. Just the key workers, cook, stablemaster, head guard, priest. You stand near the back, pretending to be organising something. He speaks plainly. The enemy hasn't moved in days, they haven't attacked. They haven't sent word, and now, with snow no longer falling, they're exposed. They're cold, they're hungry, just like you. Then someone says what no one dared before. They may have left. A scout is sent out under the cover of early grey. He slips through a side gate and disappears into the trees. You don't expect him back. Not because you doubt him, but because you've forgotten what return looks like. But 2 hours later, he's there. And he's laughing. The camp is abandoned. Empty fires, scattered bones, a few tattered tents. No sign of horses. Just ruts in the snow leading back toward the distant river pass. They're gone, fled, frozen out maybe, or lost heart. Or just realised that a castle standing in this weather wasn't going to fall anytime soon. It's over. No horns, no parades, no celebration, just a long collective exhale. The Lord doesn't speak, he just nods and walks away. Later that evening, someone says he collapsed in his solar, weeping into his wine. You don't know if it's true, you don't care. You're too busy helping shovel out the gate. It takes hours, the snow is packed hard, layered with ice. But everyone joins in, even the nobleman's youngest son, sleeves rolled, hands red, working beside a stable boy. No one speaks of rank now, not today. The gate creaks open like something ancient and reluctant. Beyond it lies only more snow, forests bent under weight, a sky too bright to look at, but it's open. And that, after all these weeks, feels like a miracle. Fringe fact. Some castles, during especially harsh winters, would consider any spring-like sign, a sprouting weed, a melting drip, a bird call, as a divine omen. They'd hold spontaneous processions, small ones, just enough to feel like the world was watching again. No one here suggests a procession, but that night, someone strings together a crude garland of dried herbs and hangs it in the great hall. Someone else lights a candle without needing it. And when the cook brings out the very last of the honey to stir into the bread, no one protests. There's a scholarly argument you once heard. Was hope in the medieval world a survival tactic or a symptom of madness? After all, they hoped through plagues, through starvation, through decades of war. Some historians say it was delusion, others call it resilience. You're pretty sure it's both. But that night, as you lie beside the hearth, shoulder to shoulder with half the castle, warmth and sleep mingling again, you hear someone begin to sing, a lullaby, soft, unsteady. And then another voice joins, then another. You don't know the words, but you hum along anyway, not because you think winter is done, but because for the first time it feels like it might end. You almost don't recognise the world outside. The gates groan open with the weight of the season still clinging to them, ice cracking off hinges, like bones popping back into place. And beyond, the landscape stretches out in quiet devastation. What was once a path is now a jagged trench of compacted snow and ash. Trees are broken under the weight of their own limbs, some stripped bare, others bowed like penitent monks. The forest looks smaller somehow, less alive. Like it forgot it was supposed to come back in spring, but it's open. That matters more than beauty. The Lord gives the order before dawn, scavenging parties. Not yet hunting, not yet trade, just seeing. Who's still out there, who survived, if the road to the village still exists, if the bridge is intact. If the mill has anything left that hasn't frozen to stone or washed downstream. You're chosen to go. It's not a reward, it's not a punishment. It's just your turn. Your feet crunch into snow that bites through your boots. The sun, if you can call it that, is barely a smudge overhead, casting everything in the kind of pale, colourless light that makes it impossible to tell the time. But your legs move, one after the other, and for the first time in weeks, there's no wall in front of you. Just space, and air, and silence that doesn't feel like death. You move with a group, 3 others plus a guard. The guard is young, face pinched, spear slung awkwardly over his back like it's too heavy for him. He says nothing. None of you do, really. Conversation feels foreign now. Out here, in this too bright quiet, words feel like litter. About half a mile down the road, you find the first body, frozen stiff, half buried in a drift. Just the edge of a boot and one gloved hand sticking up, fingers curled as if still reaching. Someone mumbles a prayer. No one stops. There are dozens like that, scattered like fallen twigs. Casualties of retreat, of cold, of time. You stop flinching after the 4th one. You reach the village by midday, or what you assume is midday, based on the way your stomach is chewing itself. It's mostly intact. The roofs are sagging under snow, the well is iced over. But there are signs of life. Faint, stubborn. Smoke curls from 2 chimneys. A sheep bleats somewhere you can't see. A boy with cheeks red as apples watches you from a loft window, then disappears. You knock on the first door. No answer. The second opens before you even touch it. An old woman stares out at you, face like cracked leather, eyes sharp enough to cut snow, and doesn't say anything, just nods and steps aside. You step in. The heat is faint, the fire a whisper, but it's something. She offers you dried roots and a bit of salted fat, which you chew gratefully while the others speak in soft tones. Trade, supplies, losses, names. You listen. The village is smaller now, half gone. Some left for other manners, others simply didn't wake one morning. The granary is empty, the blacksmith's dead. The priest froze in his chapel mid-sermon. But there's no panic in her voice, just fact. Winter's toll, plainly paid. She wraps the fat in cloth and presses it into your hands before you leave. For the little ones, she says. You nod. You don't tell her there are fewer little ones now than before. Back at the castle, the news spreads quickly, the village stands, and it's not alone. 2 other scouts report similar findings, shivering clusters of life blinking against the grey sky, stubborn as weeds between stones. The world didn't die, it just pulled in its breath. That night the castle shifts, not loudly, but definitely. The fires are built higher, the songs last longer. One of the guards sneaks ale from the cellar and shares it round. The lady of the castle walks through the hall without her furs, her hair loose over her shoulders, her daughter trailing behind her like a ghost just starting to remember she's alive. And the Lord? He smiles, just once, a small confused smile, like a man trying to remember how it works. You sit near the kitchens again, back against the wall, watching the hearth glow brighter than it should. The air still smells like onion and sweat and smoke, but it also smells cleaner. The rot is fading, the mildew is drying. Even the rats seem less frantic now, a fringe fact you recall. During medieval winters, people often believed that the world paused. Not just nature, time itself. that the season was a kind of purgatory, a place between places, where nothing counted and no decisions lasted. Only when the first thaw came did life resume. Children weren't even baptized during the worst of it. It was considered unwise to bind a soul to a dying world. But now the ice is loosening, and people are starting to move again. The steward begins his inventory. You help, partially because he demands it, partially because it feels good to count things that exist instead of watching things disappear. There are 7 sacks of barley left, 2 of oats. 5 chickens, 12 pigs, down from 14 because a hunger makes for difficult math. No apples, no salt, but still something. The priest announces that Candlemas is coming, the Feast of Light. He says it in the same voice he might use to describe someone surviving a sword wound. Shocked, tentative, delighted. The monks begin preparations in the chapel. Not grand ones, there's nothing grand left. But they hang cloth, light candles, polish the altar with melted snow and vinegar. It gleams like something new. Someone finds a bell under a pile of cloaks. They ring it once. The castle flinches, then relaxes. There's a scholar's theory you once heard, whispered behind the scriptorium shelves, that the hardest part of suffering isn't the pain, but the memory of peace. That what breaks people is not the cold, but remembering what warmth felt like. But they never talk about the opposite, how the tiniest return of light feels like salvation. You understand it now, that night, as you lie on your cot, still close to the fire, still between a pig and a boy who snores, you hear the wind shift. It no longer howls, it sighs. And somewhere in the castle, a child laughs in her sleep. You wake to birdsong, not the cawing of crows or the ugly squawk of a hungry hen, real birdsong. High, quick notes like someone plucking a harp far off in the trees. At first, you think it must be a dream. It's been months since the air carried any sound that wasn't coughing, crying, or the scrape of boots on stone. But when you open your eyes and peer toward the nearest arrow slit, you see it. Sunlight. Pale, reluctant, but undeniably real. And outside, perched on the crooked branch of the bare-limbed ash tree, is a thrush. Brown feathers, twitching tail, tiny body alive with sound. You sit up too fast and your bones complain, stiff and bruised, from too many nights on stone floors and cold pallets. But you're awake now. Really awake. And everything feels different. The castle breathes. It's the only way to describe it. It's subtle, but the shift is everywhere. The air is lighter. The tension that's lived in everyone's shoulders for weeks has finally begun to seep out. People move without glancing behind them. Doors open and close without flinching. The sick are stirring, even rising. A girl who hasn't spoken since New Year's mutters something about bread. A boy who lost 3 fingers to frostbite grins and tries to juggle apples with his good hand. Poorly, but it still counts. You step into the courtyard and the sunlight hits your face. It doesn't warm, not really, but it touches. That's enough. The snow has begun to melt along the edges of the walls, puddling into dirty water that trails off toward the drains. The walls drip slowly, like the castle itself is weeping, but in a good way. A letting go. The guard who once snarled at you for stepping out of turn nods this time. Nods. A miracle. By midday, the entire keep seems to be stirring. The cook barks orders for fresh broth, but there's an energy in her voice. The steward permits double rations of bread. Bread! A monk is seen near the chapel, sleeves rolled, hauling a sack of grain with a grin on his face that makes him look 10 years younger. The lady walks the parapets, her daughter bundled and laughing in her arms. The lord, he's in the stables, personally checking the horses. No one tells him to stop, and the pigs seem louder. And the fire burns hotter now, not because it's needed more, but because it's no longer just a lifeline. It's a celebration, a signal. Something has ended. Or maybe more accurately, something else has begun. Here's your historical marker. For many medieval castles, the first days of thaw meant action. Real physical work. Repairs, inventories, messages sent, roofs patched, holes uncovered. People didn't wait for the season to officially end. They jumped at the first sign of change like animals freed from a trap, because they knew winter doesn't end with a bang. It ends in drips, cracks, and cautious footsteps. You're given a job too, everyone is. You're told to help clear the eastern corridor, the one that collapsed halfway through the siege. You expect rubble, mould, maybe a dead cat. You don't expect what you do find. A storeroom, completely intact. sealed by the collapse, untouched by rot or rats. Inside, sacks of grain, jars of pickled vegetables, a crate of dried fish, a barrel of ale. No one even remembers this room. It wasn't on the latest maps. It was lost, like some half-forgotten secret of the castle itself. But now it's here, and it's enough food to last another month, maybe 2. The steward weeps when he sees it. Not just tears, full, undignified sobbing right there on the floor with his arms around a sack of barley. You pretend not to see. Everyone does. And now for your fringe fact. In hard winters, miracle stores were a real phenomenon. A hidden barrel, a forgotten cellar, food sealed in snow and rediscovered just in time. Some chroniclers called it divine intervention, others called it luck. But those who lived through it never forgot where the line between death and survival actually was. One thin wall, one stubborn latch, one hidden door. Evening comes, and no one hides from it. Candles are lit, not because the dark is dangerous, but because it feels good to see each other's faces. You eat near the fire, surrounded by people who have names now. Mira, who once shoved you into a snowbank to get closer to the stew pot. Jory, who lost 2 toes and still manages to outwalk everyone. Old Hal, who insists the fish in the storeroom are cursed but eats them anyway. These aren't strangers anymore. You survive together. That changes things. The monks sing again, but this time it's joyous. Not the haunted chanting of midwinter, something lighter. You don't know the words, but the rhythm is enough. Even the chickens seem to cluck along. There's a scholar's debate that tickles your memory. Someone once argued that the true strength of a medieval castle wasn't in its walls, or its gates, or its stores, but in its people. That what made it keep unbreakable wasn't stone, but stubbornness, community. You used to roll your eyes at that. Now, you think maybe they were right. The castle looks the same, but it feels different. It's quieter now, not because it's broken, but because it's resting. The kind of quiet that comes after weeping, after rage, after loss. The kind of quiet that settles in when people start believing again. That night, you stand at the gate and looking out. The sky's clear. Stars are out, real stars, not just blurry lights behind cloud. You can see Orion. The moon is waxing. The trees are still weighed with snow, but you can smell the earth beneath it now. The scent of thaw, of dirt, of roots waking up. And then, from the trees, a sound. Distant, soft. A fiddle. Someone in the village. Someone celebrating. Someone brave or foolish enough to play again. You listen, you smile, you're not warm, not yet. But you're not cold either. So that's it. Not a dramatic ending, not a climactic battle or a golden sunrise over a freshly rebuilt world. Just survival, just breath, just the slow, steady return of colour to a place that spent months suffocating under white and grey. The castle still stands, scarred but upright. The people inside, those who remain, have become something more than what they were. Not heroes, not saints, just alive. Spring won't arrive all at once, it never does. There will be more snow, more cold nights. The hunger won't disappear overnight, the pain won't forget itself. But it's ending, you've made it past the worst. The gates are open, the sun rises earlier each day, and there are footsteps in the dirt where before there was only silence. You'll rebuild, repair. Sow what little seed remains, patch the broken windows, laugh again, carefully at first, then louder. You'll mourn those who didn't make it. Not with grand funerals or eulogies, but in small moments. A song hummed under your breath, a cup raised at the fire, a glance toward an empty seat. And you'll remember the dark. You'll remember the sounds, boots on stone, wind in the flue, the distant call of crows. You'll remember the weight of another person pressed close at night, the taste of hot broth, the crackle of firewood. You'll remember the quiet terror of stillness, and how you endured it anyway. That's the truth of winter in a medieval castle. It doesn't kill you all at once, it tries, slowly, quietly dulled day after day. But you outlasted it. Sleep now. The fire's low but steady. The walls are quiet. The castle is watching but no longer afraid. Spring is coming. You made it.